All right. Morning, everyone. Morning. Welcome to today's stakeholder consultation on the nationally determined contributions. I heard yesterday in the session that we should limit our reliance on short phrases and acronyms. Now, that could be a trap, because if you're like me, I hide behind the acronyms. I don't take the time to actually go find out what the full words actually mean. So as much as possible, and for the sake of making this information as easily understandable to a wider group of audiences, let's try as much as possible to unpack the things that we're saying and try level best not to stick to jargon as well as terminology that we've relied on for so long. With that said, welcome to Sandton. Congratulations for braving the traffic. You're a survivor, you've won something. We will reward you with lunch during lunchtime. Oh, but there is a precondition, I hear, for you to get lunch. You must hand the name tags back at the registration desk, trying to be very responsible and limiting our carbon footprint so we can recycle these and make use of them for other consultations. In fact, this is not going to be the last time you see us. We are going to have a colloquium at some point. So when you come back, you can make use of your name tag again. So the first thing first, I went into talking, I didn't introduce myself. Hi everyone, my name is Lebogang Molai. I'm going to be the facilitator today. My role is within the PCC Secretariat, and I lead research and policy, mitigation being one of those issues that lie within the ambit of research and policy, and the nationally determined contributions being a cross-cutting issue for the PCC more broadly. In terms of house rules, we have mentioned one in terms of the name tags, just to also note that whoever wants to speak, when we do get to the time where we will welcome inputs from the floor, you are advised to please make sure that you've switched your mic on so that the audience online can hear us, as well as for the purposes of record keeping. We can hear you and you are clearly audible. This is important because this also forms part of our stakeholder report, where we take into consideration the views that were expressed in today's session. We do have an online audience that's also participating in today's session. We will be getting feedback from them. They can make their inputs in the chat. We'll just check in terms of who's managing the online participation. But if you do have something you want to say in the session here today, you can indicate by raising your hand on the virtual platform, and we will acknowledge you and you can make your point. We want to make this session as interactive as possible. The idea specifically of today's session is to get the views, particularly from those who are active in local government and who are local government practitioners. So as much as possible, we do want to get your views here today. We don't want to just listen to ourselves talking. In terms of, I will give you a break at some point. I promise. I'm a very nice facilitator. I will give you a coffee break, but just to also note that if you do need the bathroom, out the door, there is a passage on your, that's my right, right next to the restaurant, and you'll be able to access the bathrooms there. So just to also give a very brief background in terms of the process that we are following to get inputs into the formulation of the PCC's recommendations on the NDCs, just to indicate that we did have a previous round of capacity building on the NDCs. So noting that this sometimes becomes a really technical discussion, and a lot of information is out there, a lot of research has been done. We did, as the PCC, convene a capacity building session that was stakeholder focused, that some of you in the room may have attended. I know the dates did coincide with COP, so some some people may have been at COP at the time, but the idea of that session was to do some background and capacity building so that to some level, there is some sort of equal footing when we come into today's discussion. So today's discussion, yes, there may be an element of still capacity building here and there, but really what we want to hear is the views from local government and those who are active in local government. So you'll see it in the way that the agenda is structured. I quickly would just want to take us through the agenda quickly, and then I'll hand it over to Commissioner Pukunzi to do the opening and welcome. So just to indicate, we're going to do an opening and welcoming session. And then after that, I'm going to welcome Steve, who is the Senior Advisor for Mitigation, to take us through the NDC overview. If you were at the capacity building session, that is a similar presentation, but we know festive season got the better of us. There was a gap between that time, the festive season, and now. So we just want to do a quick refresher, and then we get into the issue related to actual reflections from yourselves on the NDCs. Then after the NDC overview, we will have reflections on the PCC's NDC recommendations. There's a whole host of people that we're going to invite to come onto the stage to say something. We'll have a tea break, and then after that, we're going to have a facilitated discussion from yourselves here who are present, as well as anybody that is online that wants to participate. And then I'll take it to, I'll do a brief summary as much as I can, and then we will go into next steps as well as closure. Okay, that's enough from me. I will then take this opportunity to welcome Commissioner Pukunzi, who will then take us through the opening and welcome for today's session. A round of applause, please.
Program Director, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, MMCs, councillors, MMs, senior officials in the municipal local government, my colleagues, commissioners that are here, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, good morning. We equally greet those that are on the platform. Madam Facilitator, I would like to begin by extending my sincere gratitude to all of you for joining us today. It is an honor to be here in my dual capacity as both the Presidential Climate Change Commissioner and a SALGA member of the National Working Group on Environmental Planning and Climate Resilience. I'm especially grateful for the opportunity for SALGA to co-host this important consultation session on the South Africa's nationally determined contributions for 2035. This gathering takes place at a critical juncture in our nation's climate journey, with heavy fatal floods in KZN South Coast and the devastating wildfires in Cape Town, which have reminded us of the urgent need for the resilient and adaptive climate plans. Program Director, as we work towards an ambitious nationally determined contribution, NDC, as you said, must try by all means to not to use abbreviations, but we equally used to use abbreviations. The UNFCCC COP28 recognized the importance of multi-level action and the role of local government and subnational governments in advancing global climate action. The Coalition for High Ambition Multi-Level Partnership, known as CHAMP for Climate Action, was created to enhance cooperation between national and subnational governments in the planning, financing, implementation, and monitoring of climate strategies. CHAMP was put forth by the COP28 presidency in Dubai, and as February 2025, 75 nations have endorsed it. South Africa is a trailblazer and a leader in implementing multi-level actions and multi-level nationally determined contribution, should consider joining the 77 parties who have endorsed CHAMP. Ladies and gentlemen, it is essential that our national commitments fully capture the on-the-ground realities and the needs of our 257 local governments. In South Africa, local government is the fear that it stands to lose the most due to the impacts of climate change and measures of responding to it. This is due to the way it has been constituted and funded. Under the current construct, the survival of local government is dependent on higher levels of consumption to fund its financial viability, where there is less consumption of water, electricity, and less production of wastewater and solid waste. The financial viability of municipality is negatively affected. Over and above this, municipalities have the least impact on national policy formulation. It is a sphere with the least influence on policy and the least access to resources. As a result, if change has to happen, it must incorporate empowering local government. Despite all this and the fact that local government's frontline experiences in addressing climate change, from escalating disasters, risk and climate-induced losses to the urgent need for resilient ecosystem-based adaptive infrastructure, we have not been afforded a genuine opportunity to shape the content of the NDC, and this has to change. Program Director, the Climate Change Act has been a game changer, providing a clear mandate for local government to play an active role in addressing climate change. Today's consultation is not just a forum for a dialogue, it's a call to action. We must advocate for a process where local government is not merely consulted. My apologies. We must advocate for a process where local government is not merely consulted, but is an active partner in both shaping and executing our climate response strategy. Our municipalities are the engines of transformation, piloting groundbreaking projects and directly confronting the challenges posed by a changing climate. Their contributions are indispensable in South Africa is to build a resilient future. As we move forward, Program Director, we need to address a few key issues. One, balance funding priorities. Current funding streams remain heavily skewed towards mitigation, while the vital adaptation measures that protect our communities and support disaster reduction continue to be underfunded. We need significant resources to be directed towards adaptation, including building resilient infrastructure, managing disaster risk, and responding to climate-induced losses require equalization and investment. It is imperative that our funding strategies are recalibrated to support a balanced approach that empowers local government to protect our communities. The second one, that is not the last, but inclusive national policy formation. The development of our NDC must reflect the diverse realities across our nation. No NDC can be truly ambitious for South Africa without fully integrating the actions, needs, and the response requirements of the local government. Our municipalities are the hubs of invaluable local data and innovative solutions that must inform the national climate policies if they are to be both effective and equitable. In my roles as the Presidential Climate Change Commissioner and a member of SALGA Environmental Planning and Climate Change Resilience at national level, I am committed to bridging the gap between the national ambitions and local realities. I call on our national policymakers and funding bodies to engage with us in a spirit of true partnership, one that recognizes local government as a key driver of change and provide us with the resources and authority necessary to implement transformative climate actions. Let us today serve as a turning point. Let's today serve as a turning point. I invite all to share your insights, challenges, and success so that together we can forge a national climate strategy that is as inclusive as it is ambitious. By aligning our national policies with the practical experiences of our municipalities, we will create an NDC that not only addresses climate mitigation, but also robustly support adaptation and the means of implementation, ensuring that no community is left behind. Program Director, as I'm requested to do welcome and in this session, let us remember that the strength of South Africa's climate resilience lies in the unity of our efforts. Local government is at the forefront of this battle, and it is only through our collective informed action that we can build sustainable and secure future for all South Africans. With those few words, Program Director, I welcome everybody present on the platform, both physical. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Pukunti. And I think those words around the NDCs being a call to action, because really that's what it's about, and unity in action are really important. So maybe just to also indicate to yourselves that before today's session, there was a session with the faith-based groupings yesterday. And I think there is an understanding of the critical role that local government plays in order to have increased action as well as ambition, because there's a lot of strength in collecting local data for local solutions, which was the common theme that arose in yesterday's consultation. So I think having the discussion with local government here today, after having had that very strong emphasis on local solutions, as well as the collection of local data, as well as financing needs for local government in order to be able to implement the things, or to be those means of implementation for what we're seeking to do in the NDC processes, is quite important. I also just wanted to mention this before, Steve, you come up here today, just to indicate that this is not a box ticking exercise. And I know we have a horrible experience in terms of consultations previously. Usually you come to a consultation and documents have already been drafted, but because we need to say that we met with a couple of people and produce registers, then we have these sessions. This is actually very different. We haven't drafted anything. Right. We have an idea of, what a potential story could look like for South Africa's proposed NDC. But it was important to come to stakeholders first, to consolidate the views of stakeholders, and from there inform what the NDCs should be. So this is a truly bottom-up process, which I am hoping we will take to heart, because that then tells us that we are operating from the point of view of wanting the local credibility part of the NDC to have a better expression in the process that we followed. And also because in terms of the Just Transition Framework for South Africa, we are really keen as the Presidential Climate Commission to really adhere to procedural justice, especially when it comes to policy recommendations, as critically important as the nationally determined contributions for South Africa. With that said, I will invite you, Steve, to come and do the NDC overview. Round of applause for Steve, please.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So just a kind of quick question. How many of you were at the previous capacity building session, if you can raise your hands? Okay. About the same as yesterday. How many of you had the opportunity to watch the link that was in the invite to this event? Okay, so not many. Okay, so I think what we will do is recap some of that. So the process that the PCC have been running in support of the NDC is in November, we ran a series of capacity building sessions with each of the stakeholder groups, and we went through the detail of what is an NDC, how do we think about adaptation, how do we think about mitigation in a lot of detail. Those events were kind of 5 hours long. All of the recordings for those sessions are online. So we're going to go through it quite quickly today, but if you want to take the time to go through it in more detail or something piques your interest today, you have access to those resources, and we invite you to look at those. Okay, if we can get my presentation up, please. So we're going to spend a little bit of time, and you can ask questions, and we can go a little bit slower if you'd like to, talking about what is an NDC, like what is its political origination, why is it important, why are we engaging on it, and then talk a little bit about the components of an NDC, and we'll get into a little bit more detail. So just to make the point that the Presidential Climate Commission played a role in the previous NDC, and for those of you who don't know the PCC, we are primarily the commissioners, and we have 2 commissioners here today, but the commissioners are nominated by the various social partners, business, government, youth, civil society, etc., and each of them have about 4 commissioners, and then there are a few specialist commissioners from a couple of specialist sectors. There are 2 local government commissioners, and their role as commissioners is to advise the president and his cabinet on things that relate to climate change, typically, and the economy. So the NDC is a particularly important policy piece that we would then advise on, but it's important to note that we're not writing the NDC. We are providing support to government. We're providing advice on what we think should be in the NDC. And the way that we do that, as we did in our previous process, is we commission research to try to understand economically, socially, environmentally what's important. And we read a lot of other people's research. In the previous NDC cycle, the business community had just released a report about decarbonization. So we particularly looked at that National Business Initiative work. And then we host public dialogues. So the PCC has two mandates. One is to provide advice to government, and the other is to build consensus around sustainability issues. And so a lot of what we're doing today is a bit of a mix. We're trying to gather your thoughts and your feelings and what's important to you as the local government social partner, to make sure that we include that and we think about that when we draft the technical recommendations. But obviously we kind of test everything against the science and the research, and that's kind of the process that we run and that we ran the previous time. So we're kind of replicating that process now, but what we've added is this idea that these are quite complex issues, and we need to give people access to resources to understand the research and have access to the research, and that's what our kind of capacity building program was about. So should we just be clear what the NDC is? So the NDC stands for Nationally Determined Contribution, and it arises out of the commitments that we made that you will have heard of, the Paris Agreement. And so all countries in the world kind of committed to set bottom-up voluntary targets and that are sort of the best that we can do as a country, and the addition of those targets would lead us to staying below a certain emissions level and therefore below a certain climate impact or temperature rise. So it kind of makes sense. And it was new in the Paris Agreement. Prior to the Paris Agreement, we had tried to do things top-down and regulatory. This is what you will do. It's legally binding. That didn't really work. We couldn't get people to sign up to it. And so in Paris, there was this shift in ethos. And a lot of what we talk about in this discussion is this bottom-up. We have to decide what is possible for us, what is fair for us. And we get to decide. It's a sovereign discussion. But therefore, it's a discussion that has to involve all of South Africa's people. So it is DFFE whose job it is to write that commitment, Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. And so they have a parallel program that they're running. They also do research. They're also going to be doing consultations, and they'll do consultations in each province, whereas our consultations are largely with social partners like yourselves. And so between us, we'll kind of hopefully gather enough views on what this NDC should be and how it should be structured. Stop me if you have any questions of clarification. Happy to do that. So the NDC is the responsibility of the DFFE, but also it must cover three things: adaptation, mitigation, and means of implementation. Adaptation refers to what do we do in response to the changing climate. So we have more floods, more droughts, more fires. Like, how do we change the way we do things to minimize the impact of those changes? Obviously, as climate change gets worse, and if we don't manage to reduce our emissions, then those impacts become worse. Right? And so one of the ways that we can minimize those impacts is by mitigation. And that means reducing our emissions into the atmosphere. Right? And so they kind of work hand in hand. If we don't mitigate, we end up with more physical risk, more climate risk. And then, of course, it's difficult. I don't want to pretend that it's easy to do. Transforming our economy to be climate compatible is an enormous task. And so we need support. And in the climate change language, that support is phrased as means of implementation. Right? And that support can come in a range of ways. It can come as finance, it can come as trade support, it can come as intellectual property and capacity building. And so we have to be able to, when we draft this IRP, think about what do we have to do in adaptation, what do we have to do in mitigation, and what kind of support do we need and in what way. Does that make sense? So what we're wanting to do in this process is to understand from you what is important to you as a stakeholder group, and how do we integrate that into the advice that we give government? Okay, makes sense? All right, excellent. So it's also important to understand that the NDC sits in the context of local legislation, right? So at this national UN level, we have to submit two things. One is the nationally determined contribution, and the other is the low emissions development strategy. And that is the plan to achieve the NDC. Kind of make sense? And these commitments are voluntary. But the way that they are expressed to become compulsory is through the domestic legislation system, which is obviously legally binding. And the centerpieces of that is the Climate Change Act, but of course there's the carbon tax and a whole range of other legislation and regulations relevant to climate change. And the Climate Change Act has its roots in the National Development Plan, in NEMA, in the National Climate Policy, but it establishes predominantly two things: an adaptation system and a mitigation system. And you will know the adaptation system requirements best. It makes it compulsory for every government entity, including local governments, that you do a risk and vulnerability assessment. In other words, understand what the risks of climate change are for your municipality, and a climate response plan. What are you going to do about it? Right? And that's a challenging thing. Where do you get the data? Do you have the internal skills? Right? And so that's part of the adaptation debate. How do we build our capacity to be able to do these things? So there's the adaptation system and the mitigation system. Right? And the mitigation system is, how do we meet the specific emissions targets that we set in the NDC? And there are two instruments there. One is the SETs, the sectoral emission targets, which are how much can emit, how much can transport emit, how much power and energy emit. And of course, if we set the SETs, they should help us achieve the NDC. They should be closely related. And that's the instrument that connects these international commitments and our local regulation. Does that make sense? Of course, then you get down to sector level. Like, how do we implement that? So if we have a particular target for power and energy, what are the particular power and energy policies that help us achieve that target? And so the IRP and the Integrated Energy Plan, those are all national sector level policies that then should also match the SETs, which then should also match the NDC. So that's kind of important context, but I think particularly for local government, what is very important for you is the regulations around adaptation and the need to have risk and vulnerability assessments and climate action plans. Okay, are we happy so far? Okay, so the NDC, although it's bottom-up and voluntary, it's not something that you can just make up. Right? There are rules, there's guidelines. And the NDC goes hand in hand with a thing called a global stock take. So every 5 years, you have to reset your NDC. And in the intervening period, the UN body will look at how are we doing in meeting our commitments, what's changing in our knowledge on the science side, and are we meeting our ambition or not? And that's called the global stock take. So you have an NDC setting, then a global stock take, then we set our NDCs again, and then we have a global stock take. And the idea, the magic of the Paris Agreement, is that you will respond to the information in the global stock take and update your targets accordingly. Does that make sense? So the most recent global stock take was 2 years ago in the COP at the United Arab Emirates, which produced a thing called the UAE consensus. And there, what they said, and I've got a slide on this later, is we're not achieving our targets. And therefore, we're not achieving the target of staying well below 2 degrees, ideally below 1.5 degrees. And the implication of that is we have to ratchet up our ambition. Right? Does that make sense? So the kind of rough guidelines and rules for an NDC is it needs to be more ambitious than the previous NDC. Right, that's a basic rule. It must be aligned with the requirements of science, and in the UAE consensus, we particularly say a 1.5 degree trajectory. So what does that mean? We have to limit our emissions globally to a level that warming will not go above 1.5 degrees. Right? And then we must represent our country's best efforts. If everybody's lazy about the NDCs and say, well, we'll reduce by 10%, we will go to 4 degrees or 5 degrees, right? And so the idea of the Paris Agreement that we have agreed to, right, that we have signed on to, is that we will submit our best efforts. And what we debate in our society is, what is our best effort? Right? That's what we're here to do. What is our best effort? All right, and then the last point, and there are other rules, this is a kind of highlights package, is whatever we submit, we have to explain why we think it's fair. Right, so if we wanted to double our emissions, would that be fair? We would have to justify why that would be fair. And so the way we kind of summarize all of this is whatever we submit as an NDC, it must be locally credible. We as South Africans must think this is something that we can achieve. It must be internationally credible. Other people must believe that this is our best effort. And it must be scientifically credible. It must be aligned with the science. Does that kind of make sense? And there's tension there, right? We've all been watching what's happening in international politics and in particular the United States. And so what is internationally credible now? You know, EU say one thing, United States say another thing. How do we fit into this quite complicated geopolitical space? The scientifically credible is a little bit more constant. And then, of course, locally credible. And you will know from your constituency that there's a huge debate. Should we extend the life of coal? Should we not? Should we transition to internal combustion engines, from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles or not? What do we do about people who lose their jobs? How do we protect particular industries? So this is a very complicated and very difficult debate. And I guess what we say about the NDC process is what we are debating here is how do we design our economy? Does that make sense? So it's a very important conversation and we're thrilled that you're here. So let's start with adaptation, right? What are these risks that climate change present for the economy? So the UN have a body called the IPCC, which gathers all of the scientific research, and every couple of years they publish a report updating us on what's going on in the global science. And they're called assessment reports, and we're currently on the 6th assessment report. It was released 2023. And for the first time, the IPCC published a special report on Africa in their 6th assessment report. And so we have a bit of insightful data. And here are some of the climate impacts they describe. A 34% reduction in agricultural output. Reduced income and increased income inequality for Africa relative to the rest of the world. Right? And that's an important point. Climate change impacts the poor the most. The poor and the vulnerable the most, right? And so if we do very little to mitigate climate change, those impacts are greater for the poor, right? The wealthy tend to be okay. They've got insurance. They've got big walls. They can chuck water in if they need it. Obviously, poorer people are less resilient. Over 3.6 million weather-related displacements. So these are catastrophes, flooding, storms that displace people from their homes that then need particular support. And then a negative 5% impact on GDP per capita. Now, does that sound good? All right, no. Here's the scary part. Those are things that have already happened. The forecast is much, much worse. So if we do nothing about climate change, right, we should be clear, if we do nothing about climate change, a further 25 to 75% reduction in agricultural output, a 50% drop in South Africa's GDP by 2100, and at 2.5 degrees, 56 to 86 million people displaced by climate disasters. That's the population of South Africa, right? And where are we headed? The global stocktake I mentioned earlier, they concluded that we are globally heading for 2.1 to 2.9 degrees of warming. So we're well in this 2.5 degree space. It's also important to note that South Africa warms at twice the rate of the global. So if we're going somewhere between 2 and 3 globally, it's 4 and 6 here. All right, so we're dealing again with a disproportionate impact and a disproportionate change. So we at the PCC are of the view that these impacts are so big that we must avoid them at all costs. And the way we do that is by mitigating our climate emissions. And so we must always remember when we're thinking about mitigation, and it seems incredibly difficult and very challenging, what happens if you don't do it, like that counterpoint of climate damage. Here's some additional data. This was a study done by Swiss Re, so it's the insurance sector, and I think these numbers are by 2030, and these are the GDP impacts. So remember we said somewhere around 2.5 degrees, so somewhere in this red box, somewhere between -14 and -21% negative impact on GDP in South Africa, Middle East and Africa. So maybe it'll be different in South Africa. Does that make sense? So these impacts are huge. They're things to really worry about. There's a team down the road at WITS called the Global Change Institute, and they're world-class climate modelers, and they are worried about 3 what they call tipping point risks, these risks that are becoming increasingly likely in our economy. A day zero in Gauteng. Remember the day zero in Cape Town, running out of water. That is a risk they think is increasingly likely. Some of the models show this risk happening as early as 2028. This is not a 2050 problem or a 2100 problem. These things are happening now. A collapse of the maize crop in sub-Saharan Africa. What would that do for food security in South Africa? And then category 4 or 5, cyclones making landfall on the east coast of South Africa. All right. So these are, again, very material risks. We need to avoid them at all costs. And then this is another chart again from the assessment report 6, which basically says, if you don't take action now, your options narrow over time. All right. So if we do nothing for the next 10 years, there are fewer things that we can do in 2035. And so it's important that we take action now. To give us more options and prevent the worst of climate change. Happy, everyone? Pleasant way to start the day. But this is the situation we're in. And so our position as the PCC is we need to avoid this physical risk as much as we can. And the way we do that is through mitigation. Now, we should also take note that we are a small economy. Right? And so it is important that other people play their role. And so diplomatically, we need to be forceful with other countries that they need to reduce their emissions so that we don't take the brunt of their actions. And to do that, if we think about the NDC, that's a lot easier to do if we are also progressive ourselves. Right? So there's a politics to the NDC as well as an internal economic discussion. So this is how just to help us think through what are all the things that we have to do. Now, we're going to have to do some adaptation and resilience anyway. We're already around 1.5 degrees of warming, and we'll probably go to 2. We might even go to 3 degrees of warming. And so there will be some climate resilience that we have to do. And so this ability to preempt and withstand the variability and the shocks is how we think about resilience. And we have to do 3 broad categories of things. We have to anticipate the risk. And I think this is very important for this group because this is what you'll have to think about when you're doing your risk and vulnerability assessments. We have to anticipate what's going to happen, how often, how intense. We have to think about how do we adapt, and then we will still have extreme weather events, and so then we have to think about recovery. What do we do? So there's still roads and bridges in KZN after the floods that haven't been rebuilt, right? And so that's a kind of failure of recovery. And this is very expensive. Rebuilding infrastructure, it's not cheap. And so the more money we spend here, the less money we spend here. Does that make sense? Okay. So if we think about anticipation, there are kind of 2 components to that. There's how do we forecast what's going to happen? And so things like the weather services infrastructure is very important. Where do we get our data? Where do we get our warnings? We have to have an early warning system. How do we tell people? In yesterday's discussion with the faith community, they were particularly concerned with informal settlements along riverbeds. How do you reach those people? Right, so that they can get out, get their assets out. So that early warning systems and outreach is a core part of how we respond to vulnerability. Then there's adaptation. What can we do? One of the things that came up yesterday is with livestock. As temperature goes up, you get more livestock deaths. Can we build livestock shelters? Where would we build them? right? That's an adaptation measure. Can we not build infrastructure in river floodplains? Right, that's an adaptation measure. And then, of course, there's recovery. What do we do if there's a disaster? How do we do the emergency response? How do we rebuild? And just because we've had the one discussion with the faith movement yesterday, they raised the issue of, can we use churches, mosques, and temples, for which there is one in every town, everywhere, as a disaster response center? What an interesting idea, right? But of course, local governments, you are at the center of all of these things. You are the interface with people. So that's kind of how we think about adaptation and resilience. And to kind of guide you in how we would translate that into the NDC, right? We need to decide what's most important. And maybe investing in infrastructure to forecast and warn people about extreme weather events is something that we really want to do. And so that then becomes a goal within the adaptation section of the national term contribution, but also then becomes a support request in the means of implementation section. What do we need to do? We need to build the capacity of people. We need to build the physical infrastructure. We need to build the communication infrastructure. That costs money, right? Does that make sense? So that's the kind of opportunity here. Let's understand what our needs are, what we're concerned about, what we need to put in place, and how we're going to fund it. We, of course, won't get everything that we want out of the means of implementation, and so we have to understand carefully how we leverage that. We happy so far? Okay, good. So this is just quickly the stuff I've already mentioned, the global stock take. It basically said we're on track to 2.1 to 2.8 degrees, and there's just this big gap between what we have to do to get to 1.5 degrees. And 1.5 degrees is the scientific consensus. Once you get above that, you start to get feedback loops. It's hard to predict what will happen. And so our goal is to stay 1.5, below 1.5. I personally think that's gone. Now we're focusing on staying below 1.6. But we mustn't think that, because we've missed 1.5, now we can aim for 2. Every 1/10 of a degree makes a big difference. So now we aim for 1.6, and hopefully we get it. But if we don't get to 1.6, then we go for 1.7. Does that make sense? So we mustn't then anchor on 2. That would be accepting a lot of risk. Okay. The way we do this, of course, is mitigation. Let's reduce our emissions. And it's important to think about the curve of the emissions. So most people think it's like a straight line down to net zero. You would have heard of net zero. So net zero is the scientific consensus that in order to stay below 1.5 degrees, we should have no more CO2 emissions in the atmosphere around 2050. It could be 2055. It doesn't have to be 2050, but around 2050. And so when we do this kind of modeling, and this is the modeling University of Cape Town did for the World Bank and their Country Climate and Development Report, you'll see that 58% of the emissions reductions happens between 2030 and 2040. So we have to take action now. Remember that earlier point, like even on the mitigation side, if you don't take action now, it becomes virtually impossible to meet those targets. So what have we set, and how does it relate? Like, how do we think about, often people say to me, but we're a developing country, so we should be allowed to emit slower than the rest of the world, right? And so how does this all fit together? So if we think about our emissions today, and the UAE consensus basically says in order to stay below 1.5 degrees, we have to reduce our emissions by 45% by 2030 and 60% by 2035, right? So if you apply those numbers to our emissions, this should say 2030, my apologies. We would have to get from roughly where we are in 2020 to 271 tons of carbon by 2030 and 191 by 2035. It's a global average, right? So we would expect developed countries to move faster and developing countries to move slower. And so we would expect the UK and Europe and the US to be below the line and countries like South Africa to be above the line. Does that make sense? And we are above the line. So these are our commitments. We've committed to 398 and 510 by 2025, 350 and 420 by 2030, right? And then if we just drew straight lines, and remember from the previous chart, that's not all straight lines, but if we did to net zero, and remember net zero is not absolute zero, so it's sitting at about 60 megatons, we would have a range of 278 to 330 in 2035. Right? Now, this is what we are debating. When we talk about the mitigation goal in the NDC, this is what we're talking about. What do we set for 2035? Right? So with the rough rules that we have, has to be aligned with science, ideally 1.5 degrees. It has to be progressive, and it has to be our best effort. We would expect the range to be somewhere there, well above the global average. Right? So this idea of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, that we have some special circumstance because we're a developing nation, is already baked in to the kinds of targets that we set. And if we look at the scientific modeling that we have, work done by a range of people, if we look at the JET IP lower bound for a 1.5 degree future, it's 200. Still above the 191, this sort of point there. And if we go for a 2 degree world, 390. So that's kind of the absolute maximum range. If you're going for a 2 degree world, you would be up there. So if we set an NDC target that was, for example, 400, that would be explicitly accepting a 2 degree world. If everybody did the same, our particular actions. And if you look at the sort of most common numbers, they're at about 260, 240, just below this point, which is what we would expect from our previous charts, right? So just to help us frame what we're debating. But of course, to get our emissions down to these points, we have to make big changes to our economy. And that's where we get stuck, right? How quickly can we close coal? How quickly should we close coal? What do we do about communities in Mpumalanga? What do we do about communities in Limpopo, right? And these are all important and valid perspectives. But just remember, if we don't do it, and everybody else in the world takes the same kind of approach, then we head for more physical climate risk. And so that's the kind of balance that we're weighing up all the time. Where are we now was a question yesterday asked. We're at about 450, so we're somewhere there. So we're well within our 2025 range, somewhere in the middle, but we're struggling to get to below 420. So for 2030, we'll probably be somewhere around 420. And so then we have to kind of get down to these levels. An interesting way to think about this is the steeper the line, the more expensive it is, right? Because you've got to do more quicker. And so if we kind of go on a trajectory that looks like this, and we get to kind of 2042, and we're still up here, then you have this very, very expensive transition down. Again, this emphasis, you need to act now rather than leave it. Okay, so how can we think about this? Like, how do we decide where our dots must go on the chart? And we can think about this in two ways, and typically this is how people think about it. The bottom end is if we get the support we need. The top end is what we'll do without the support, right? But it still doesn't really help us in deciding where those points must be. And so we at the PCC have commissioned a whole bunch of research. We've got big, large-scale CG economic models. We've got some microeconomic models looking at how do these impacts at a economy-wide level trickle down to households, that we want to understand that. What do we do about the climate? What do we do about water and air quality? What do we do in specific sectors? Obviously, energy and finance are important. So we, together with some other partners like SA Tide, who are a research arm of Treasury, we've done a bunch of this work. National Planning Commission are doing a really interesting project around finance. Where do we get the money from? These are all important questions. And of course, we're not the only people doing research. There's a whole bunch of other studies. And we've kind of looked at these studies in order to inform how we think about making recommendations. And just to give you some sense in how we might just frame the logic for where these NDC points will be. We've done this work with UCT where we ran their model, changing a whole bunch of things. You can do it with energy efficiency, you can do it without. You can have localization, you can have less localization. You can have high interest rates, you can have low interest rates. And we changed all of these things and we ran the model 40 times and it produced this chart, which is a little bit scary, but I only want to highlight a few things from it. If you notice, we've got the carbon budget, in other words, how much carbon we're emitting into the atmosphere on the bottom end, and we've got GDP per capita growth on the left-hand side, right? So you will see the higher the budget, right, tends to have a higher GDP. So what that means is the more carbon space you have, the more the budget grows. Right? Does it make sense? So economically easier to do it if you don't have to reduce your emissions. But also notice that at about this point here, GDP doesn't grow. And it correlates at about 10 gigatons. So a carbon budget of 10 gigatons, there's no economic gain for a budget bigger than that. Right? Does that make sense? Which gives us our top end. Right? If we think about our best effort, well, that then the models generally say, obviously they're not perfect, so around 10 gigatons is our top end. But if you think about what's in the model and what's not in the model isn't modeling everything. And so at a 10 gigaton budget, it's not modeling trade impacts of the EU not buying our products, for example. It's not modeling climate impacts. It's not modeling other externalities like air quality. So a lot of the studies that we at the PCC have been doing is, well, what happens with trade? And so we commissioned a big project that looks at trade impacts and found that the trade impacts at high carbon budgets are big and are actually have quite a big negative impacts, as much as 5% of GDP by 2030 on our economy. Externalities like air quality, the difference between a high carbon budget and a low carbon budget plan, 2,400 people die, less people die prematurely from air quality pollution. Right? And so these things are not priced into the model. And if you consider them in aggregate, the 10 gigaton budget probably overestimates the GDP gains. And likewise, with a 9 gigaton budget, there's things that it doesn't model. What if we do different kinds of mining? We mine vanadium. What if we have battery value chains? Right? What if we make other components locally? It doesn't model access to preferential finance, and it doesn't model the upside of trade changes. And so there you can imagine that the 9 gigaton budget is underestimating our GDP growth. So just as a framing, right? 10 gigatons, least regret action could provide the top end, 9 gigatons, and we think maybe even 8 gigatons could define the bottom end, right? It's just a way for us to think about this. And part of what we want to do with you as stakeholders is understand what kind of research you have done, what kind of insight have you done, what are you observing? It doesn't have to be a full-on research program, but what are you seeing in your spaces that will help us think this through? A last point on justice. If you think about 10 gigatons as our budget, right? That's the amount of carbon we emit into the atmosphere. As a globe, to stay below 1.5 degrees, we would have to emit 275 gigatons. So we are then, as a country, saying we deserve 3.6% of that global budget. But our economic contribution and our population contribution are only 0.6 to 0.8%. So we're asking for 5 times our current share. Fair, right? Getting back to this conversation about fairness, is that fair? And if everybody thinks that, and everybody asks for 5 times what they currently contribute, well, then we're going to 4 degrees, right? And so that's the challenge. So in this conversation about the NDC, we have to think about what's fair in this context of international geopolitics. And then I would also just point out how conservative the science is. If we manage to only emit 275 gigatons, that gives us a 50% chance of staying below 1.5. We're still just flipping a coin about whether we stay below 1.5 degrees, right? Okay, so finally, So we've got adaptation, we need to avoid those risks, mitigation, these are the kinds of things that we can do. They're often quite good for our economy and not bad for our economy. And in fact, the research is showing that lower carbon budgets may in fact be better for our economy than higher ones. But we still need some support. And so the support is often phrased as means of implementation. And we need to think about finance, where we're going to get the money. We need to think about capacity building. We need to think about technology transfer, and that should say intellectual property. And we need to think about trade. And how do we use all of these things? And the key question here is, how do we leverage that support for local efforts? No foreign government is going to pay for all of our changes, right? They're going to give us some money, and we have to use that money to leverage domestic investments so that we can grow our economy. That makes sense. Same though for capacity building. And so the money, these are just examples from various different models. The amount of money we need are big. And you're not going to get that all from international support. And so we have to be thinking very carefully about how do we use our support strategically to grow our economy, and in particular to incentivize domestic investment. And how are we doing? So this is work our climate finance team within the PCC have done, tracking investment flows. And currently we raised like 130.6 billion, which is, a drop in the ocean, but it's not also nothing. And there are a couple of things that we should observe here. Most of the money is coming from private investment, which we would expect. And so the question there is, how do we leverage public spending in a way that stimulates private spending in a way that grows the economy? Right? The other thing to notice is most of the investment is domestic, which is good. Right? We're driving this change ourselves, and we are, to some degree, leveraging our international support to maximize domestic investment. But how are we spending it? And there's some concerns. We're spending the majority of it on mitigation and not a lot on adaptation. And in particular, we're spending most of that mitigation money on clean energy, building renewable energy. But we need to diversify that spending. We can't just transition the energy sector. We have to be thinking about other sectors. And then the challenge here on adaptation, with a tiny amount spent on water, tiny amount spent on agriculture, these are gaps. This is where we need to spend more. But obviously we need to hear from you around how we might do that and what your priorities are. So that is a quick run through the theory of what is an NDC, where does it come from, how do we think about adaptation, how do we think about mitigation, and what do we have to think about means of implementation. Does it make sense? Any questions? Yeah, please go ahead. We've got one here and one there. Yeah, please lean into the mic so people online can hear you. And introduce yourself, please. Oh, that one's not working. Maybe the power's off. No, there we go. That one works.
Greetings. Hi. My name is Samuel Mashimbi. I'm from Nbaroke. Thanks for the opportunity and also the presentation. I want to double check in terms of the local government. Is there any information that states their readiness when coming to early warning system? And then what are they doing as the local government in terms of land invasion and the encroachment? I'll give reference to informal settlement that are in Tembisa next to Gulfspray catchment to indicate in terms of why the municipalities are not enforcing the bylaws, because there's a unit that is called land invasion unit. So are we always gonna be reactive or proactive? And also, does the local government have this early warning system in a true way? For an example, there's a problem in terms of the emergency services, be it the ambulance. I'll give you a reference in Tembisa. When you call for an ambulance, it's gonna take you ages, you see, to get access to them. So in terms of the emergency regarding that. On the other hand, does the local government have resolutions, council resolution, when coming to what you have planned as a PCC, so that it's more on at the national level, at the provincial level, at the local level, because we expect the local government to lead in terms of as an implementing agency in terms of that. So are they that type of ready as per the timelines or the, yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
Steve. Thanks.
No, see, these are excellent questions. And as for the rest of the day, we're not going to have answers to your questions. All right. We might know some and we might have our own ideas, but it's not what today's about. So the way we're going to respond to many of your questions is to think about how we turn those into recommendations for the NDC. And there are a couple of things I heard here, right? How do we integrate early warning systems? How do we enhance our emergency responses? And there are already deficiencies there. How do we plug those gaps? And how do we start integrating at a national, provincial, and local government level, and at a community level, even below that? So Solga might have better answers to your questions, and they might want to respond later. But these are all very useful insights. Yeah, thank you. So.
Thank you, Steve, and greetings to everyone. I'm Dr. Mafumbu. Luanda is my name. I'm the head responsible for climate change department at eThekwini. Oh, I should come close to this. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, climate change is a real issue, more especially to cities like ours. It's not just a looming threat, but we're losing infrastructure, we're losing people, we're losing ecosystems, we're losing a lot through climate change. It's a reality. Now, to us, we wish it can move beyond talk show to real, tangible, concrete issues on the ground. Maybe it will take me to what I would love to raise first, that I believe NDCs are a culmination of COP19 in terms of the discussions and where we are now. But maybe I should submit my dissatisfaction about the roadmap to these COPs, where I feel like they are more or less like ceremonial in nature, because the role of local government, more especially municipalities, because we're the cold face of climate change. I don't think that we are being considered, because, for example, we're not part of COP 29, and we were just listening to people who were talking on our behalf, and there were no consultation even before going there for soliciting consensus, you know. But I think it's something that can be corrected. Even when we came from COP, there are no meaningful discussions to tell us what was the results of COP, and there's no national discourse about what are the results of COP, what should we discuss as the country. It's business as usual, you know. But I think it's something that can be corrected, because there are issues which we've got key interest on, which were discussed there. One of them is loss and damage fund. We've got key interest on it. And to come back from there and you keep quiet, you continue with business as usual, it doesn't help us at all. And we're also interested to discuss, not just to hear, to discuss the Climate Change Response Fund, which was pronounced last year in terms of its capitalization, you know, the status, where is it now? Because we are more interested on that, because it's what will take us into action more than talking. Okay, let me come now to this thing of the NDC. You know, Steve, I'm a bit confused in terms of the purpose of this platform, you know, because in terms of Section 25 of the Climate Change Act, the minister must gazette the sectoral emission targets. And they are already gazetted from 2025 to 2030. They are there. What will this discussion therefore seek to achieve? Because they're already determined, you know, sectors have been allocated target in terms of sector targets. It's there. Then, because the lady who was opening there was saying, we're not here to rubber stamp, we're here to, but this thing is, the horses are already bolted in as far as discussing the national determined targets. Then again, in those sectors which are there, we are not there as local government. There are 7 sectors there, and we do not form part of those targets. Again, what is our role in as far as the NDCs are concerned? Because we're not part of that. Another one, we can only feature through the greenhouse gas inventory reporting. That is the only leeway we can feature. But again, there's no law that requires us to report on the greenhouse gas emission inventories. Unless someone can tell me here that there's a law that requires us as municipalities to report on the greenhouse gas emission inventories. If there is one, I think you can point me to it. If there is none, again, you can see that there is no firmness in as far as linking municipalities with the NDCs, because even like not all municipalities do report on the GHGs. Few, mine do. We do it, we publish it, but you find that even the guidelines we follow, they are not national guidelines. We follow the guidelines of non-voluntary organizations, which requires, because we are also partners to other organizations like C40, ICLE, and so on. Now I find that there's no strong link with national in as far as GHG's reporting is concerned to municipalities. We do it with other international organizations. Therefore, what ties us as municipalities to NDCs? Yeah. Then I think the last one now, if we were to talk about moving from policy to action, because to us, I think as the commissioner, when she was opening, alluded to Climate Change Act. To us, now that the mandate of local government has been clearly defined in the Act, that is a step towards the right direction. But we cannot move forward until there are things that are pending in relation to the Act that are solved. One of them is the minister gazetting the national adaptation objective. What is the status to date? And the second one is the minister of DFFE and finance determining the financial mechanism to fund the implementation. Those 2 things, they are still pending. If we can get update in as far as that, because they are linked to us moving forward in as far as implementation is concerned. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Those are all very important points. And what I take from that is the opportunity for us and why we are running these consultations is to understand these kinds of concerns that you have, right? And so if I paraphrase what you're saying, local government is not included in the stakeholder engagement and planning and discussion processes that are producing these very important things. COP positions, regulating of adaptation goals, and the NDC, right? And that speaks to a broader process around procedural justice. So the PCC have published, the commissioners have published a Just Transitions Framework, and in that they talk about procedural justice, restorative justice, and distributional justice. The way we run these planning processes has to involve people. My favorite phrase is from Labour: no decisions about us without us. Right, it gets to what you're talking about. Then there's restorative justice. How do we correct some of the injustices that exist because of apartheid and colonialism and previous things? Spatial planning, people having to travel 5 different taxis and an hour and a half to get from their house to work. Like, how do we fix those kinds of things? And then distributive justice. When we do these investments, it can't only be wealthy capital owners that benefit. Communities and municipalities must benefit as well. And so I think there's a strong justice element to how we think about the NDC and how we make recommendations. And one of the recommendations that has come from both yesterday and today, what I take from what you're saying, is these processes that are fundamentally about designing our economy, thinking about our economic future, need to be much more inclusive. So we can put that in our recommendations to the president, right? I can't give you updates on all of the things that you've asked for because we're not the DFFE, but some of them I can. So the sets, for example, the sets that are out for consultation now, or the consultation recently closed, are for the period up to 2030. They haven't published yet the sets for 2030 to 2035, and that's what we're talking about now. There should probably be better alignment between the two processes, right? We should set the NDC and the sets together, but there's a little bit of a disconnect. But 2030, we're now talking about the 2035 NDC. The DFFE are updating the sets for that period, so they haven't done it yet. And they're also updating the low emissions development strategy, the economic plan for how we get there. So those are important points. I think your points about policy to action, in the Just Transition Framework, we talk about 5 kind of levers that are important. We have economic diversification, right? We have to think very carefully about if we're closing things down because of their environmental impact, we need things to put in their place, right? People need employment, they need access to livelihood. So you can't just close stuff down. And so this conversation about how do you diversify the economy is really critical. How do we govern it? Who's included, who's not? How do we finance it? How do we manage social protection? Not everybody's going to get caught in the employment net. How do we protect people who not? And then, of course, how do we build the skills and the capacity to do this? And in all of these levers, local government is the primary partner, right? And so we think as the PCC that you are a critical partner in this process and that we need to both help build our mutual capacity, but also get you more involved in this kinds of decision making. So I'm kind of agreeing with all the things that you're saying, but just kind of describing how we think about it within the PCC. Yeah, so that's very helpful input, and we will include much of that feedback in how we provide recommendations. Did you have something? Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Bedziruzani from Thulamela Municipality. Firstly, let me appreciate the presentation and the welcoming, particularly because indeed she have indicated once she welcome us, or today this NDC is the call for action. Because you may agree with me, since the year 2011, likelihood my municipality Thulamela for the toolkit of the climate change have been identified as one of the pilot projects. Indeed, even if you check in our planning through local government, in our integrated development planning, if you check, we have cooperated all those components. And then once we went to the public participation through IDP, indeed, we try by all means to conscientize our lovely people in the ground. But the challenge remains, particularly on the issue of protecting our water sources and then our planning, the land use. You find that we can manage to control in town, but the challenge remains with the traditional leaders. You find that they demarcate at their own, and you find that they even invade the wetlands and demarcate, give our people to the flood line. And at the end, we encounter the very same challenge. One more other thing, you find that within the project we're implementing in our municipalities, even our province, we must ask ourselves one question in terms of the credibility of those infrastructure. You find that we don't have a monitoring a tool in this sense. you find that we built a road without the stormwater. I've seen around most of the disasters around our country. Most of them, you find that is because we don't have a component to monitor those things. After they complete that particular project, they are gone. There is a stormwater or not. Rain comes, flooded. We call our disasters, whereas some of the things we can mitigate due to our proper planning. I think it is a high time. Let's keep this slogan or say call for action, because it's for a long time when we're talking about these things of the climate change, adaptation, mitigate, and everything. We don't have a human resource in place. You find that in a municipality, only 2 officers within that particular component. Once you go to the province, you find that there is no responsible department to deal with this issue. And then I think send that particular call to the president that it's a high time we can come with a new strategy, like, you know what is happening in Gauteng with this Amapanyapanya and everything. Why can't you distribute those people who will be enforcing, monitoring as a pilot project and test? Because the challenge is that we have a lot of good policies in black and white here, but there is no enforcers. We'll come here, we sit down. Our brother have indicated that we end up becoming the proactive. Allow me to pause there.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are rapidly getting into the consultation part of the program, which is very exciting. But just to say that there are already some strong overlaps with what has been said yesterday. So the role of traditional leaders and how we engage with traditional leaders came up yesterday as well. This point about monitoring and enforcers didn't come up, so that's new, so that's exciting. And on the sort of water and infrastructure part, you're actually sitting next to the commissioner that Commissioner Adams, who is leads the Water Research Commission and is one of our water experts on the commission. So, yeah, these are all very helpful points. We will be noting them as the day goes by and including them in our feedback, and we're really grateful that you're willing to share them with us. But I'm going to hand back to the facilitator so that, is there online question? Okay. Do you want me to take it? Thank you.
We have a comment from Commissioner Mbali Baduza.
Oh, good.
She writes, I am worried about the increased poverty and inequality levels when local government does not anticipate, adapt, and recover. Another one regarding, I think, lamenting the high rate of unemployment and, of course, the impact on the animals with the increase in temperature. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me about the online audience. But I think that point came up yesterday as well. When we think about health, we're not just thinking about human health, we're thinking about animal and livestock health as well, particularly as it relates to food security. And obviously poverty and inequality is everybody's primary concern. So thank you. Hopefully that session was a bit helpful for context and stimulated some good discussion. So we're excited about the feedback session later on. Thank you, Lebo.
Thank you, Steve. So I think, well, not I think, I know actually. In this session, we are co-creating the ideas as we go along. There's no one person with a monopoly of solutions and a monopoly of ideas. So it's a dual process of receiving information and co-creating the solutions. And it's in the spirit that we're having the next session that we're going to have. So I am going to cue in a number of speakers who are going to be doing some reflection based on the overview that Steve has just provided. So I will first call upon Commissioner Shafiq, who will come up and do his reflections based on the overview provided. A round of applause, please.
Thanks, Lebo. Shafiq Adams from the Water Research Commission. And I just want to, I think the two colleagues from the municipality is echoing what I'm also seeing. But let's take a step back. Let's use real world examples. What's happening? Would you say Gauteng is dry or wet at the moment? And do we have water in storage to last us a season or two? Yes or no? Yes, the answer is yes. So with that argument, let's take climate change off the table. So something else is happening, because what is in the news day in and day out? Our water challenges, isn't it? You guys watch news. So it means that something else is going on that we can't pin on climate change, not in this season at least. So something else is going on. So it means that we either have a governance problem, we have an infrastructure problem, or we have a combination of issues happening. But now imagine we're going into a dry period of 3 dry seasons, like City of Cape Town had. So now we're seeing the impact of climate change, because what we know, we're going to have these extreme longer periods, returning periods, etc. But just imagine we're not having water in storage in Gauteng. I'm just again using Gauteng, and it's dry. What's going to happen to the economy? At the moment, it's ticking over. But just imagine we're now bringing in that. So it's with that I'm going to focus my input through the lens of water, because most of these impacts of climate change is also felt through the water system. Okay? But also I think the NDC is multifaceted. And I, for years, thought NDC is about mitigation and reducing greenhouse gas. But it also deals with adaptation. It also deals with the means. It also deals with what's our strategies and policies to deal with these type of things. And as Steve has said, and this is the thing that worries us in the ANR working group, that adaptation is severely underfunded relative to mitigation. So all the money is going into clean energy. You saw that 105 billion versus 15 billion. That is it. But just imagine we reach net zero. What's going to happen? Is the climate going to stop throwing tantrums? No. I think some models indicated for 50 years, we will still have that impact. So even if we reach net zero, the adaptation requirements is still going to be there. And I think this is what we need to organize. So maybe if you can just put up my slides, I'm quickly going to, and I think it's important that the concept of co-creation. And part of this sessions is to co-create, because it's also iterative. And I think there are 3 more sessions that's thematic, et cetera, and I think we will go there. But also I think this, someone must help me, it's a 3rd iteration of the NDCs. I think it's 2016, 21, and so forth. And as I said, and I think that the recommendation from the colleague from Ekurhuleni is, how do we make it better all the time? And not just going through the motion of getting a document ready for COP. And I think these are the things. But again, if you look at some of the challenges affecting water, by 2030, we're going to have a supply gap under a do-nothing approach. We have uneven distribution of our water resources. 8% of our water that drives, I think, 60 or 70% of the economy comes from 8% of the land. So just think of that. If the climate if the climate system changes in those 8% of the land, we're in deep trouble. Okay, and that is why we need to make sure that our mitigation is effective. Because remember, etc. And then we said by 90% of Southern Africa will experience drought by the end of the century. 90% of Southern Africa. Okay. And of course, we have uneven distribution of things. And again, it's some of these challenges are climate related, but they're all linked. If you don't work on the one and you don't deal with other thing, the issue of data and early warning systems keeps on coming up. I can tell you in this space, the data is a big problem. Sharing of data, collection of the data, when municipalities and then province and the national cut budgets, monitoring is the first to go. But we then talk about early warning systems all the time. These systems require data to give us that. Never mind the issues of cybersecurity, and we've seen some of these. Infrastructure integrity is probably the issue now. Non-revenue water. So non-revenue water is a combination of we're not collecting water, so it's stolen, and also physical losses. It's way out. In some places, half of that water is lost to non-revenue water. So we produce 1 liter, only half a liter gets through to users. The other half liter is lost. So, and again, is this climate change? But the problem is often we take that discourse into the climate change discussions. And I don't think it necessarily, but what it does do, it creates that opportunities for us to build back better. So at the moment, what we've seen in some other places, something what the infrastructure washes away, there is a repair and replace paradigm. But what we are saying, build back climate smart better. So when it comes back, you don't have to deal with some of these issues as well. But of course, you also then adapt. But all this is a very important thing, and this is the biggest problem in municipalities: fragmentations of roles and responsibilities. So the stormwater guy, and I think it was mentioned, does not talk to the water guy. So, but the stormwater takes all of the water, but the water guys, never sees it as a resource, and the engineer sees it as a problem that needs to be removed. So how do we, and we've done a lot of work in terms of adaptation, how do we keep that water back in the system and to use it as a resource? So that is adaptation. That is how we build resilience to some of these things. This is, my background is in groundwater, is that if you look at when we had the 15, 16, 17 droughts in Southern Africa, Namibia did not have this problem. Because what did Namibia do with their water? They banked it underground. Okay? Whereas everything must go to the sea if we don't need it. And I think this is part of the problem. The other problem is if we don't deal with the root causes, we're constantly chopping at the leaves. And I think this is part of things. And again, you'll see some of these root causes is climate change plus a lot of other things. Theft and vandalism, is that climate change? But it's the biggest problem in municipalities. Ask any municipal official what keeps him awake at night. It's not climate change, it's theft and vandalism. And this is and how do we deal with that? A climate change strategy is not going to solve that. So we need to look at it in a holistic way. How do we look at our things? And I think, and maybe I'll stop here. This is the thing, and Steve said it, and I think when we look at all of these things, and even if you think about your situation, because remember, my view is that, and one of my reflections are, this thing needs to be built from the lowest unit up. With too long, we have someone at national come up with these things, and they said, without taking that spatial, temporal, and governance distribution problems at a very local level. Okay, so we say everyone must fix their things, but a municipality that has a revenue base and a collection rate of 5%, they'll never do that. So there needs to be a different intervention to deal with that. So we can't have the same approach, but we need to look at it from a risk perspective. What is the hazard? We know it's here. It's not going away. And what we are now seeing is that we have these compound hazards. So Gauteng had heat waves, and we had now lots of rain, flooding, etc. It's not when I used to study geography and way back environmental science, we had these things called return periods. So you could have kind of work out what's going to happen. At a moment it's this, and at the next moment you have this. And what is the other problem is the vulnerability. And I think we can also, I just like to simplify it, and there's of course the one that includes exposure. What is the vulnerable? So we know the risk is going to be there because you have a high hazard, isn't it? We know the floods and drought is now a feature of our environment. But the vulnerabilities, and the colleague also mentioned it, what do we do with when political parties go and settle people in wetlands? The municipality do something, but then there's this phenomenon where we have now these lawyers coming in. I don't know where they're coming from. They come and fight. And in some cases, the municipalities have to go and take people back and put them on the wetlands, or wherever they should not be aware, or within a floodline area as well. So if you think about the sad story of Durban, it is about, we know it's gonna, flash flooding and flooding is gonna happen, but the people were exposed and were put in vulnerable places. So the risk was always high that something is going, because risk, it does not mean, it means there's a potential for something to happen. So it was always there. And why? And this is a good lens for people to think about it. So it's always there until it happens. Okay? And then, but how do we, so if you did mathematics, to make the risk smaller, you need to divide it by something, is it? And you need to divide it by something that's bigger than the others. Okay? So what we then need to do is to then also talk about adaptation and resilience building. And more specifically, the adaptive capacity of our systems, etc. And again, I need to point out from the lowest level, not what National is saying, that this is a one-fit-all approach, but actually what's happening at that community, that I think the Kalkspruit story, what's happening at that? What's the intervention there? A national policy is not going to solve it, because the dynamics at that point is totally different to what we think it is. And again, we then need to solve. But this is, I've just been in rural Guyana this week, and often, and I don't know how many people are here from truly rural municipalities here, because often the other reflection is that discourse is always urban. When we talk about water, we talk about getting more water from Lesotho. We're not talking about 56% of this country's population rely on groundwater, and only 2 municipalities out of the 150 odd has groundwater capacity. And local government association says it's not our problem. Is that an adaptive response? No. It's just raising the vulnerability of communities. Okay? And again, there are several issues how we deal with this in the water space. And similarly, you can do this for the energy space, etc. But ultimately, what most of our analysis indicate, governance is the problem. This thing of not being able to fix infrastructure and then park it under a climate change banner needs to stop, because you're not going to get out of the situation with that. And again, the approach should be, do we have the science? And I think this is what Steve was also saying, there's a lot of science happening. Do we have the resources and capabilities at that, right? And I think the colleague also say, we don't have officers that even if you come with the best plan, it's not going to happen. And then again, we need to have end user support and benefit. So where does this national early warning system sit? And the commission is working on these type of things. But again, if there's no one that's going to make it happen at a very local level, it's going to always be a problem. And then, of course, real community involvement solve this problem. And I'm happy to share the work that we've been doing in Guyana, where what we now call supported community-based water supply schemes. Communities run the show with the support from the local municipalities. And we are now 3 years in, and our return on investment, nothing gets vandalized, everything runs 24/7 as it should. But all the schemes where government came in and try and say, they're all failing left, right, and center. So it means that we need to co-create some of these solutions at a very local level and not just talk about them in strategies and policies. So I'm going to stop there. Then, yeah, and then of course, we need to bring in innovations. I'm from an organization that thinks we need to innovate our way out of this. Okay, so let me then stop there. And Chair, I hope I did justice to the reflection. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, Commissioner, you did do us justice indeed. I am going to call upon Dora Marema. I understand you'll be doing the presentation. I saw the confusion on social media when we announced our new ED. Yeah, so if people congratulate you, don't be confused, but you'll clear that up in the tea break. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's also okay, you can proceed. It's an inside joke from now onwards. So, Dora Marema, you'll do your inputs and then we'll move on to the next respondent.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and I am in on that joke because I did receive congratulatory messages. I received them gladly. And then I hope I also do get the emails that are going to your ED from now on. Thank you very much. My name is Dora Marema. I am with the South African Local Government Association. I am here with my colleagues, and we are really excited about this engagement. I think it is very much long overdue. I think I need to. Okay. So this is just our our take in terms of this process of the NDC. I think a lot has been said by Councillor Commissioner Pukunzi, as well as the colleagues from the floor, and I think Steve also touched on some. We know that what we need to have is, is to build a resilient society, and really that is a huge responsibility. It requires structural change at an enormous scale. But again, we know that it also requires, multi-level action or joint action by all sectors of society and all levels of government. So we have to really work on this together. And then that, one has to think about, the role that the Commission is playing in terms of trying to coordinate all of us and to ensure that there is some kind of a coherence within a multi-level governance system. We were this week in a local government disaster management in Daba, and we've had some of the councillors saying we have 257 local governments. We are governments in our own, in our own right. So how do you navigate all of this so that there is coherence within that complex multi-level governance system? I'm not going to touch on this slide, but I think Steve did allude to that, the huge gap we're having in terms of reaching the 1.5 degree that the science has required us to do. I think he went into the detail, but what it means for us is that we need to intensify, our ambition, intensify our climate action, despite all of the limitations that have been alluded. So I'll go straight into this one. We are here to advocate for a very strong role of local government in climate policy making, particularly now this NDC that we are talking about. I think the colleagues on the floor coming from municipalities spoke for themselves when they gave a picture in terms of, for them, they need practical interventions and it must come urgently. They need financial assistance. They experience a lot of losses on a weekly basis. We are no longer reflecting on 2022 floods. We are talking about the floods that are unfolding as we speak, and that speaks to the agency of the actions that are required. So what essentially I'm saying in this slide is that, if we've got too many hands, we've got 257 municipalities in total. If we factor in what they would like to do and what they could do, we could end up with a very ambitious NDC target for our country. because, you know, even though I know that, you know, we've been talking about the things that are not going right, that there are all these problems, at the same time, there are really innovative solutions that are coming out of the various municipalities in a country. And if we take that into consideration, we really can become very ambitious. Within the you know, the global regime, there's been call made by, you know, group of nations and subnational governments for a coalition for high ambition multi-level partnership. That was really at the heart of it, was targeting this process of the NDCs. It was literally saying that there has to be cooperation and collaboration between national and subnational governments when we are planning, when we are financing and implementing and monitoring our climate change actions. That it has to be a bottom-up approach, and I think South Africa, we really have got, you know, some level of that. Our IGR, including this very commission that includes all sectors of society, including local government, is a true example of how this multi-level partnership in terms of planning and implementation could look like. And as a result, we are here requesting and recommending that South Africa join the 75 nations that have already committed themselves. And what it means is that then we are committing as a nation that our climate policy formulation and implementation and monitoring will become bottom up, and it will involve all the 3 levels of governments as well as all the sectors of society. The commissioner in her opening address touched really on this. For us, this is something that we need to pay attention to, and I think we have not said it well enough. Local government is a sphere that stands to lose the most due to climate change. If we don't act, the local government is doomed. If we act, the action has to be monitored correctly in that it doesn't result in unintended negative consequences on municipalities. We give an example that municipalities, by their own construct and in the way that they've been formulated to be funded, they rely on the consumption of the very resources that we know that, you know, we need to preserve: electricity, water. You know, they rely on revenue generated from that, but also the revenue generated from wastewater and solid waste. And when you think about a low carbon society that moves away from this overconsumption and moves away from generation of waste, then we need to go back and look at how are we going to restructure local government, particularly it's the way that it's funded, the way that it generates its revenue. We know that there's been an assumption at the beginning of local government when it was formulated that a lot of its resources needs to be self-generated through the sale of all of these. So what does that say? Because I think there's another argument that said that Salga has tested that says even that assumption in terms of the revenue collection, we know it's not real. And somehow it's disjointed when you talk about the capability and the capacity of municipalities to maintain its own infrastructure and revenue from what funding sources, if they're receiving about 9.5% of the fiscus, and the rest has to be generated from now the just transition agenda of our country and the world, saying we need to move away from overconsumption, we need to move away from generation of waste and become carbon neutral. So what does that have to do with the path that we've chosen? How does that influence the NDC? And I think it is important, again, the other point is to raise that, again, local government has the least influence on national policy. I should have put national there. And again, access to the resources I indicated is very less. And then, so what it means is that any action that we take in terms of how we adapt, how we mitigate climate change in our country must incorporate the empowering of this sphere that is so vulnerable in terms of its viability. So what, you know, I think for me, this is really at the heart, Steve, when we think about this ambitious target. What are we saying? I had a comment was read online from a commissioner saying she is worried about the high levels of poverty and the huge inequality that already is there, but will be really multiplied if we are not going to pay attention some of these fundamental issues. Just in terms of what we believe are the gaps in the process, I mean, firstly, we believe that the DFFE, the author of the NDC, really should have been involved in this consultation, particularly today, to reflect with us in terms of how can we be able to better the process. We feel that the process itself is not very transparent enough. We are not able to understand the process. Where are we at right now? At what point do we sit together to say, local government, what are you doing? Because even though we've got 257, we've got 8 metros. The colleague from eThekwini indicated that they have been working on this voluntary greenhouse gas inventories and other processes as a result of the partnerships that have been brought in by other international organizations like ITLE, like C40 Cities and others. So that says that there is work and there is awareness at the local government level. When are we going to bring in that into the room to start informing this new NDC? And we believe that, you know, we can literally improve by really knowing that we cannot be able to focus on climate change through the traditional means of a top-down. We need multi-level collaboration that brings all the 3 spheres of government, including the other sectors of our society. And the other one that I can mention is the insufficient integration of local data. It links to what I just spoke about. There is a lot of data. In this week, during our disaster management in Daba, the CEO was just indicating that as SALGA, we have been engaging with over 4,000 municipal officials or specialists in different fields, in municipal health, in disaster management, in finance, and all of those people are actually data sources. So they hold data from their own municipalities that really can be harnessed to be able to start informing processes like the putting together of the NDC. The other one I think has been mentioned by the previous commissioner who just spoke in terms of the imbalance between the funding allocated for mitigation and for adaptation. And at local government, the amount of losses and damages that are faced are really calling for us to start creating a balance, if not, you know, trying to bring up adaptation and resilience building funding to where it needs to be. And again, I did touch on the issues around the local innovations. There are many innovations at the local level that we believe can be factored in. We were asked to talk a little bit about some of the work that we have done, and I think the colleague from Thulamela spoke about the Let's Respond process that was started a couple of years ago, 2017, I think 2016 back then, supported by GIZ, implemented by the department, DFFE, together with COCTA and SALGA, and that resulted in all the 44 districts being supported to develop what we call the Let's Respond climate response plans. So that was just one of the first step in terms of really conscientizing municipalities in terms of what could be possible. It was way before the climate change bill, even at that time. So that work was then graduated into a program that probably many municipalities participated in, called the Local Government Climate Change Support Program, again supported by GIZ, going around the country, working with those districts to now look at how could they put together projects out of the response plans that they put together. And again, we took a step further to look at reviewing the various municipal infrastructure plans. We looked at water, we looked at electricity and others, and looked at how could they be more responsive to climate change. And then we also took a couple of the district one plans that have been put together and looked at how could those also be able to respond to climate change. The work of taking the climate response plans that those were developed during the Let's Respond toolkit into align them with the requirements of the Climate Change Act, and we then partnered with the CSIR using the Green Book and others, and also developed tools and frameworks to simplify the process for municipalities to be able to do the work in-house. And this obviously involves a reiterative process of training the municipal climate champions to be able to understand how they could be able to do this over time, because it is tedious and it requires a huge amount of data, which many don't have access to, or the data is sold, so it needs to be bought. And again, it also requires the support of their councils in terms of, so this work, we started with 9 districts and their locals, and we now gradually rolling it out to others. I have not really touched on the work that has been done with the city. So there is a city sustainability support program led by National Treasury, South African Cities Network, and SALGA that has been targeting, and in partnership with ITLE and C40 cities and other funding organizations, to be able to specifically look at the needs of the cities. And in there, we have brought in the 39 intermediary cities into the work that has been done. Here, we also have been working with the National Disaster Management Center as well as DFFE on looking at the disaster risk management plans of municipalities and integrating climate change into them. The work around the just transition, we have been going around, and I think we're doing it now. This financial year is the second hosting provincial dialogues, and I know that the PCC have been involved in that, walking, going around throughout the country with us to then activate the conversations between municipalities, their communities, and the various stakeholders on the implications of the just transition on local government, and how, what sectors or what areas will be affected within a particular municipality, and how we could start looking at making sure that there are no unintended negative consequences. You probably might be aware of the work that we are doing with the Just Energy Transition Project Management Unit at the Presidency, where SALGA is now the Secretariat of the Just Energy Transition Municipal Council. And through this work, we work with various entities, including the DBSA on the finance, Department of Energy on energy access to deal with issues of energy poverty, working with COCTA on municipal capability to be able to support municipalities. And with the PCC, there is a pilot project that assists municipalities to assess their state of readiness to be able to start working on or taking just energy transition projects. And through that, our energy unit has set up a project preparation technical support office to assist municipalities. So just in conclusion, we believe that our nationally determined contribution as South Africa can really be ambitious if we fully integrate the contribution of municipalities, that we need to improve on our multi-level coordination to align our national goals with our local realities. That adaptation efforts, resilient building, and disaster risk reduction must receive equal attention alongside climate change mitigation efforts, that local climate data and municipal experiences should really shape this in NDC, this NDC, and also recognize and empower local government as one of the key spheres of government and the key driver in how our country will respond to climate change. Thank you very much.
So just to say that we have checking if this is working. All right, we're good. Just to say, we're very impressed by the presentations that we're getting. We've got a small group chat and we're talking about all of you as you present, just so you know. And we're very interested in the thinking that's gone into this. It shows that there's a lot of work that's happening behind the scenes in local government, planning for these issues. I like what you said in the last slide, that in order to increase the ambition, we require the preparedness and the readiness of local government in order to be able to implement a just transition. And I think this takes us again back to Just Transition Framework for South Africa, where it identifies governance, particularly local government, as a planning instrument to get us towards a just transition, which I think is really important and timely. Helen, over to you. You'll be the last reflection that we take before our tea break. I believe you're online.
Yes, hello. Can I just check that you can hear me clearly?
Perfectly. So we'll hand over to you then.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And first to say, I was asked not to put together a presentation, but just to speak to the topic. So I don't have the fantastic graphics and images that my earlier colleagues have used, but I'll try to keep you interested in what it is we have to say and the experiences we have from the city of Cape Town. So first of all, just to say good morning, my name is Helen Davies. I'm the Director of Risk and Resilience at the City of Cape Town. And today I'm representing the City of Cape Town's Executive Mayor, Jordan Hill-Lewis, who is one of the two PCC commissioners representing the local government sector. My inputs are across 4 areas. The one is around acknowledging the role of cities in the NDC and local governments. The second is around adaptation, third mitigation, and third around the implementation enablement. I'd like to start by first acknowledging the PCC for embarking on this multi-stakeholder engagement process on the NDC and for recognizing local government as one of the key stakeholders sectors to consult with. We know that the NDC needs to be scientifically aligned and internationally credible, and it must enable us to continue to trade globally, to create an economy that is sustainable, and to unlock climate finance. But it must also consider our local conditions, which has been highlighted by previous speakers and those asking questions in the audience. Adaptation and mitigation goals and the move to a just transition intersect with and build on many of the developmental objectives of cities. And for most cities, these have been firmly embedded in their IDPs. In the context of Cape Town, this is part of our vision to be a city of hope, which sees resilience as a core foundation in achieving our service delivery goals. But we have to do that within a resilience framework in order to ensure that our infrastructure programs and service delivery are resilient to the impacts of climate risk, are also proactively creating resilience for citizens and the economy, and contribute to our climate mitigation goals. So municipalities therefore present significant opportunities to accelerate the transition to a carbon neutral and resilient economy that is more just. Municipalities, as has been pointed out by other speakers, also carry substantial risks from an ineffective transition, which would directly impact on local communities and economies. Local governments also have the power to enable green economic investments, to drive green job creation and stimulate local economies, and we need to see how we can enhance this. As cities and municipalities, we have significant buying powers, we have regulatory powers, and we can play a key partnering role and knowledge sharing role with the private sector. The one challenge we have as cities and local governments is that we seldom know the extent and timing of likely climate-related threats, and we're therefore not able to use that knowledge to motivate for different approaches, address underlying vulnerabilities, especially in the context of significant inequality, and to utilize scarce resources to manage the transition while maintaining normal service delivery. So research, data, and early warning systems are therefore all critical. The message is clear: cities are at the forefront of transitions, and country-level planning needs to be informed by local needs. It should also be recognized that many cities in South Africa, including the majority of the metros, and this has been highlighted by others, have already committed to ambitious climate change and science-based targets. So in Cape Town, we adopted our Paris Agreement-aligned climate change strategy and action plan in 2021, and we annually assess our program against this action plan. The Climate Change Act of 24 brings both new responsibilities and opportunities for municipalities across the country due to the requirement to develop climate change response assessments and action plans. So it's crucial that the updated NDC includes and acknowledges the role of cities and local municipalities as key implementers of climate action, and that it emphasizes the need for improved coordination and alignment of roles and responsibilities across all spheres of government. So moving on to the adaptation component, we understand that the National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy is being reviewed, and we call for municipalities to be deeply involved in the participation and consultation around that review. On sectoral plans, it's important to acknowledge that the national process underway to develop sectoral adaptation plans for key sectors as per the requirements of the Climate Change Act. What we do need is clarity on the timeframes, how municipalities can input, and whether the plans will be ready in time to be included in the NDC. These sectoral adaptation plans are also necessary as the national adaptation strategy is largely framework type of tool and doesn't go into the details of adaptation actions required for particular sectors. So it's essential that municipalities are given the opportunities to contribute meaningfully to the sectoral adaptation planning process and that local level knowledge is integrated into these plans. In terms of municipal adaptation action plans, the CSR Green Book that was mentioned has been an extremely useful tool for municipalities. However, this tool is most useful for smaller municipalities that don't have the need for a detailed and spatially differentiated action plan. The lack of standardized, agreed, and scientifically defensible methodology for risk assessment and adaptation action planning at the local level means that those municipalities that have the need and the capacity to carry out more detailed analyses are doing so in isolation. And the results of these assessments and associated action plans are therefore not necessarily comparable, and this limits the ability for us to roll these local level assessments and planning into provincial and national assessments and plans, and ultimately into international instruments such as the NDC. In terms of indicator development, we know that adaptation indicator development is generally acknowledged to be a challenging and contested process for most contexts. And we note that the revised NDC process offers an opportunity for the development of an agreed set of adaptation indicators. And given this, it's essential that local governments, particularly those cities and municipalities that have been at the forefront of adaptation action planning, are adequately consulted in these processes. A top-down approach which doesn't account for the work that's already been done by local governments is likely to create inefficiencies and hamper effective collaboration. Moving on to the mitigation component of the NDC. Is local government participation in national decarbonisation is only now maturing with the implementation of the Climate Change Act. So National Treasury's Circular 88 indicators have required local government to indicate the status of their climate change response plans, but these will now be mandatory. The NDC stakeholder engagement process provides an opportunity for national government to outline the follow-on processes. It's important also to acknowledge that a number of metros have been involved in voluntary mitigation planning and target setting processes for some years, generally partnering with ICLEI C40 and reporting into the CDP, as mentioned by other colleagues. There are also some notable local municipalities, so it's not only cities, that have been highly proactive in this regard. So the NDC update process therefore offers an opportunity to start thinking about and discussing how these parallel voluntary and legislative streams might be harmonized or aligned. In terms of data modeling, from a technical perspective, the modeling that goes into the NDC is not generally that spatially disaggregated, apart from agriculture, forestry, and other land use emissions. And there's a need for more detailed discussion as to how national and subnational planning entities and spheres of government can better engage and align on datasets, targets, and modeling processes. There is, however, a bigger challenge inherent in the process of modeling sector changes at a high level over quite long timescales and based on assumptions of varying quality, and then trading these off against economic and political factors. In terms of the legislative environment, it's important to acknowledge the complex legislative environment that municipalities are operating in from an energy transition perspective, and to better understand what legislative reforms are necessary to enable metros and municipalities to support key NDC actions meaningfully in a coherent plan. So procurement, law, and practice is constantly being tested and in flux. Challenges such as the lack of legal or regulatory definition of distribution system operators, as required by the recently published South African Wholesale Electricity Market Code, and the lack of legal clarity as to how municipal distributors could participate in wholesale electricity markets under the provisions of the MFMA, are inhibiting factors for major action in the electricity transition. Lastly, on the mitigation side, it's essential that DFFE be adequately resourced to manage the country's greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and to develop and manage a credible and rigorous accounting system in order to ensure that complex instruments such as carbon credits are effectively accounted for and managed in a national greenhouse gas inventory. Lastly, in terms of the means of implementation and finance, the investment required to meet the goals set out in NDC and the Climate Change Act are immense. With grants and public finance being scarce, there's an urgent need for the country to leverage its policy, planning, capacity building, and diverse financing tools effectively. The success of this will be boosted by clear national level policy that provides confidence in the country's commitments to its NDC. We know that local government is highly exposed to climate risk and has a significant service delivery burden, which means that it's constantly striving to do more with less. Furthermore, understanding the financial sustainability interventions for municipal electricity utilities in the context of the just energy transition goals is crucial. We really support the emphasis on a review of the municipal fiscal framework as outlined in the JET IP. The role of local government in finding and allocating new sources of revenue and financing also needs to be acknowledged. Cities certainly can play a role in new energy value chains, whether that be energy security, grid services, EVs, and hydrogen. And national government support for these new energy value chains should allow for cities to also have a role in this space. In terms of external funding and financing challenges, we note that the City of Cape Town has a strong preference for balance sheet rather than project finance. So some of these comments might not be applicable to all municipalities. But some of the challenges we face are access to financing or funding is a challenge for most municipalities. There's very little available and or accessible, and there is significant competition between municipalities to access this support. The dominance of loan-based climate finance is a challenge, as many municipalities are either not able to obtain loan finance or only offered loans at the very high interest rates, or they're not willing or able to take on additional debt. Thirdly, instruments such as green bonds can be useful, but they're complex and they may not be more cost effective than a loan given the onerous verification and other requirements. Fourthly, adaptation projects are typically not revenue generating and so are not attractive for external funding unless they are large-scale capital projects linked to key infrastructure such as water or provide for significant risk reduction such as protecting revenue. Fifthly, a number of the big climate funds work through the national implementing entities, and that sometimes limits the ability of local government to apply directly for funding. Working through those NIEs for funding can be challenging as timeframes are sometimes unclear and the programs are not always designed with local government level needs in mind. The administrative burden and therefore the cost of applying for finance to external entities such as the GCF is high, and it can limit participation by municipalities in these funding options. Many adaptation projects are also considered as OPEX projects, for example, alien invasive clearing, which then can't be capitalized and therefore cannot be put forward for loan financing. Adaptation grant funding is limited and is generally of a smaller size, so it's not well suited to programmatic scale interventions. And lastly, in terms of challenges, the cherry picking of key projects off the balance sheet for climate finance may make the rest of the balance sheet less attractive to other funders. I'd like to stress the role of sound financial governance because sound financial governance and maintaining that is critical for investors and donors to be confident that their money is being spent effectively. The more a municipality focuses on ensuring sound financial governance as the foundation to delivering on commitments and projects, the more able it is to build trusting partnerships with financial institutions, be they grants or loans. Many municipalities struggle with good governance in this regard, which could be an area for national support. In terms of infrastructure planning and management, from our experience to date, improved infrastructure planning is an important tool for obtaining climate finance. And that's been one of the main focus areas within Cape Town. Loan finance is dependent on having a predictable schedule of projects that can be delivered on. And part of that predictability is created through screening tools, budget tagging processes, so there's a clear pipeline of projects that are orientated towards resilience. Developing infrastructure planning capabilities and effective project management systems are therefore key steps in being able to access external finance and really should be supported in municipalities across the country. In the current jet financing mechanism, there seems to be an underestimation of the effort required for project conceptualization. Through our experience, we found that full project conceptualization, including project value creation and revenue models, is a critical and complex step. And technical assistance to local municipalities on this aspect should be the major focus in the short term, possibly also paired with some showcasing and sharing of models between municipalities. In terms of overall approaches to climate finance, we agree that there is a need for a more sustainable approach to climate finance, which focuses on collaboration and reduces the sense that municipalities must compete with each other to access limited resources. Linked to this, and mentioned by previous speakers, is municipalities would appreciate clarity on the potential climate change response fund that was announced in the previous SONA. More consideration also needs to be given to alignment between climate adaptation finance and disaster recovery funding and how these could be better integrated. For example, where disaster recovery funding could be avoided by proactive adaptation interventions. Lastly, on the issue of mandates, due to the historic structuring of local government services, we feel there are several mandates that have either not yet been fully transferred or are delivered by non-local actors in the municipal environment, but yet have a significant impact on the cities and municipalities' ability to transition. And so it's really important that consideration be given to mandates and associated funding for the just transition-related activities for municipalities. In conclusion, it's clear that the role of local governments in the NDC process is essential, and that we need to work towards greater integration and collaboration in our climate change response actions across all spheres of government. We are willing and we want to partner. Thank you for giving local government the opportunity to make our inputs today and to be part of this important and globally significant process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for those inputs. You raise critical issues for us to really think about. One of them that really caught my attention was just around the question of sound financial governance in order to be able to attract funding, especially when it comes to being able to attract highly concessional loans as well as grant funding for projects at a local level. It's really, really important. And I think the burning issue that is on the minds of local government practitioners everywhere around revenue generation and what it looks like moving forward. And I think that's probably something we can interrogate in the facilitated discussion that we're going to have after the tea break. So for now, I think we've done really good work. We've had a lot of information. Let's have a bit of a leg stretch. Let's have some tea, come back refreshed so that we can provide interesting insights in the facilitated discussion. And for those who are online, do not disappear. We will share a link so that you can also participate in the facilitated discussion after the tea break. I am suggesting that we go for a tea break now, and then we will return at 11:45. That's a fair amount of time so that we can have our facilitated discussion and summarize and conclude in time. Thank you very much. Yes, please. If we can start getting people back into the room so that we can kick off the second last session. All right, if we can get settled down and get back to our seats, we'd like to start with the next session. All right, if someone could close that door for me, please. Thanks, Jürgen. All right, we are back for the next session. So I've been asked to make two announcements. So the first one is about, we're serious about getting these name tags back. So please, this is another reminder. Please do not take it home. It is not yours. Take it back to the registration table, please. I'm serious, you won't get lunch without this badge. So please, please take it back to the registration. It's not me. The event organizers keep asking me to make this announcement. Okay. And the second one, please collect a validated parking ticket so that you don't have to pay for your own parking when you leave here. So please do that. I've also been reminded to remind you about that. All right, so we're going into our facilitated discussion. You would have seen Steve was busy putting post-its on each table. So this is what we're going to be doing. If you can see behind you at the back of the room, there are 3 flip charts. So help me, Steve, which one is the first one? I think the first one is there at the back. The second one is there, and the third one is right over there on the right of the room, well, my right, your left. So we're going to ask you on the post-its to respond to 3 questions. And each question or each answer that you write must correspond to the respective flip chart that it's meant to go onto, okay? The people that are online, I understand that you also have a board. It's an online board. There is a link to it, to please make use of it so that you can also answer the question. You're also a part of the conversation. So on your post-it, the first question that you should be responding to is, firstly, what are you worried about? You're worried about a lot of things. Donald Trump is the president of America. But specific to the NDC, South Africa's NDC, what are you worried about in terms of mitigation, adaptation, or means of implementation? So the first, thank you to whoever's working the camera. So the first question that you're going to respond to is, what are you worried about? And relate that to either adaptation, mitigation, or means of implementation. If you're worried about school fees, that's great, but that's not the question we're asking. We're asking you with relation to the NDCs and the various sections, adaptation, mitigation, as well as means of implementation. All right? And then the second question. The second question, and that's that flip chart on my left, your right. And that question is, what principles should we be following when setting an NDC? Okay, I'll repeat that again. What principles should we be following when setting an NDC? And this could be principles related to adaptation, mitigation, as well as means of implementation. All right. We're moving on to flip chart number 3. And then in terms of flip chart number 3, we're now asking you, what specific actions or targets should we be including in the NDC? And these targets or actions should relate to either adaptation, mitigation, or means of implementation. So those are the questions, and shout out to the cameraman for being so fast and getting to those flip charts on time. Again, this is not just an activity for us in the room. You have a board online. There is a link to it that has the exact same questions that we are responding to here. Please write on your post-it and then go to the various flip charts, and then we're going to have a discussion following that. I'm hoping we can do this in 5 minutes. Please do try your best to answer all questions. This is all questions. Please do try to respond to all of them. It's necessary for our input and our engagement just now.
Hi, sorry, can someone help the online people to show us how to add notes? Thank you.
Okay, I think we've gotten a decent amount of responses from the various tables. So my suggestion is that you will have an opportunity. So when we have this next round, which is the engagement on what we've heard since in the morning and the various reflections that we've had on the PCC, as well as responses to the questions that we put on the flip charts, we'll then have a discussion based on that. If you do think of something else that you want to add onto the flip charts, you're more than welcome to quietly get up from your seat and put something on the post-it and put it on the flip chart. We're keen on hearing that. And I can see some people wanted to write essays. We gave you a very small post-it on purpose. But if you want to tell us more things, it's okay. We have a special email address dedicated to you. It's mitigation@climatecommission.org.za, where you can feel free, write us a thesis if you want, and then we will look into that as part of our summary into the submission for our stakeholder report. So, thank you. It's right there on the screen. So mitigation@climatecommission.org.za is where you send us any additional insights that you have in terms of the questions that we've just asked. So this is the part where we engage colleagues, particularly if there is something that you wrote on the post-it that you just want to have a reflection on or make an input on in the discussion here today, or anything related to the reflections that we've had here today. By just a show of hands, we'll give you an opportunity to say something and facilitate a discussion from there. Just want to see all the way there. So let me start there and I'll come here. But let me start with you at the back. And please, again, please introduce yourself for the record so that we know who was making which input.
Okay. Thank you, Program Director. My name is Ludwig Mabushiro from Sekhukhune District Municipality in Limpopo, one of the rural municipalities there. My contribution, Chair, I just want to indicate to the House that, especially taking it from the model that Stephen has presented when it comes to the local credibility issue, I'm taking it to say the concept of climate change, it's something that to my take in terms of approach that we are taking at our place, it's a concept that it was never reflected or been dealt as an item on its own. It's just been filtered in as a responsive way following these activities and these challenges that we are dealing with now. So my take contribution to this commission is to say, as we go back, advocate to have the same way we managed in the past to advocate for air quality to exist on its own, judging by the dynamics that were taking place. So let it be the same with the climate change, such that when there's a grant, the same way with MIG programs that we provide, let it be in that concept also, such that it receives a bigger attention. And we also need to put timeframes when it comes to all these programs that we are engaging in. Otherwise, we'll remain in the talks and will not have a limit to it until the nature consume all of us through floods and all these other dynamics. That's my take. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ludwig. I think that's a really important consideration. So when it comes to the conversation that we're having currently, it sounds like we are more reactive rather than proactive. There was a comment that was made yesterday around budgeting at a national level. I know we're talking local government now, but budgeting at a national level is not very responsive to the needs when it comes to climate change and climate response. Or let me put it in this way, the budget allocation is not sufficient, right? And what that participant was saying is you need to follow the budget to see what as a country we are prioritizing. So if we don't allocate sufficient budgets, we are planning to fail in essence. And if at national level something is already going wrong in terms of budget allocations, I can just imagine what it happens when it reaches you at the level of local government. It becomes even more of a challenge. It becomes even more of a challenge for yourself. So maybe that's also something for us to consider as we're making our inputs in today's conversation. An even earlier thought was around the participation of council members, the councillors, and the types of budgets that they approve. We might also want to say something about developing their capacity for them to understand the importance of some of the things that we're talking about here today. There's a question on this table, and then I'll take another round of hands.
Thank you, Chair. It's not, yeah, maybe it's a question. Oh, my name is Ntobe Likolisa. I'm from the South African Local Government Association. I want to premise this by reflecting that from as far back as COP17, I think it was in 2011 in Durban, sub-national governments were concerned about the extent to which our response to climate change takes into account adaptation. And I think with the efforts that were put there, we then from there on saw adaptation being mentioned. But what is clear is that while there's a lot of talk about adaptation, we still have not given it the attention that it requires in terms of providing resources. And what we were saying then, and it is still the case now, is that the effects of climate change tends to be left to the lowest level of government. So if we don't adapt, those who have to battle the effects are the communities and local government. Others move on, you know, because they are not in the daily grind of surviving the effects of that. I'm raising this because I think in the NDCs, it's such that I don't know how to make it a nationally determined contribution, a contribution that is about adaptation, because it is a contribution to self, is not a contribution to the collective, I would say, as mitigation easily measured. I mean, if you have seen Steve's presentation, a lot of it talks about what would be our contribution towards reducing greenhouse gas. And it's easy to have that kind of a discussion because you're talking about a common bowl and say, we will deposit this in this common bowl. But in adaptation is basically saying, this is what I'm going to do to survive what's coming to me. But I do think it is important to have adaptation contributions, because overall, anyway, we are visited by climate change as a result of collective action. And therefore, when we commit resources to fend for ourselves in response, it is our own contribution to survive what we are visited by. So I do think that we need to have that. And I was thinking that there are two important policy processes, which I think they are institutional adaptation initiatives in South Africa. And I think maybe we should consider including this in our contributions. The one is the institutional process of overhauling the disaster management system of South Africa that is currently underway, so that we commit to the world that we are going to do this. And the way we are going to do it, we are going to result with this kind of institutional setup. So I think it is an institutional adaptation measure that we should commit to. The second one, there is currently a commitment by South African government to review the funding framework of local government. Dora, in her presentation, did indicate that the current construct of local government is such that it's dependent on consumption. The more we consume, the better municipalities survive, because we sell electricity, we sell water, we sell the collection of wastewater, we sell the collection as a service of solid waste. When you reduce all of those, you have taken away almost 2/3 of local revenue. So when you therefore are reviewing the way you fund local government, you are adapting the institutions, because otherwise they will not survive what we are trying to do. And when they don't survive, other things suffer. Roads that must be maintained suffer. Municipal health that must be maintained suffer. Social development generally suffer. So I am depositing, Chair, that maybe we do need to consider having a very strong submission on the side of contributions on adaptation. And I'm suggesting that these two institutional measures should be considered as some of the commitments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Maybe just let me just say this. So in our conceptual thinking of how we put a policy recommendation together, it was our view that the issues related to adaptation must be forefront. Because the physical climate risk is a serious one for us, considering that we are warming at 2% more than the global average. So for us, we think it's key to put issues related to adaptation forefront and center. So I completely agree with you. And it wouldn't be a local government conversation if the issue of disaster management systems didn't come up. There are serious challenges at the local level. Others that are within your control as practitioners, others are completely outside of your control. So an overhaul, as drastic as what it sounds like, to me, sounds like it's something that must be elevated in this conversation, because there are clear inefficiencies. And I think this question around reviewing the funding framework for local government is important. What I would add to that is that there also needs to be an additional step that we take around innovative financing mechanisms, particularly when it comes to adaptation. So the question around, and I know it's been asked about a lot, the Climate Change Response Fund, as well as this idea and introduction of a just adaptation and resilience investment plan, is also key for this conversation. And to me, it sounds like a natural means of implementation, particularly for local government, in order to achieve and realize South Africa's national determined contribution. Just maybe because this question was asked, where is the CCRF ever since the president made the announcement? The PCC was instrumental in conceptualizing the CCRF. So in terms of, the scope of need, in terms of issues related to a governance framework for a CCRF, where that could be, how do you capitalize a fund of this nature, is something that the PCC has been conceptualizing, and the commission in the previous commission meeting that took place in December did make some recommendation and adopted a recommendations report relating to this. Colleagues should be able to access that particular report when it is available on the website. The natural next step is for DFFE as well as National Treasury to then go into the fund design so that you can implement a CCRF adequately. Because yes, it deals with the issue of fund disbursement, but it talks about the need to do this quickly. When a disaster hits you, you don't have 12 to 18 months to think about what your strategy must be. You must respond and respond very quickly to address the needs, especially at a local level. I just want to check if there are more inputs that colleagues would like to make. I see there's a question, so I'm going to take, if we could all raise our hands so that I can have a clear indication in terms of those that want to speak. So I see the lady in pink over there, and then I'll come to the gentleman over there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, facilitator. My name is Kumucho Robinson from Sekune District Municipality. I'm being partly covered by the latter speaker, especially in terms of the issues of funding. Yes, indeed, we need to make sure that review of the local government framework does try by all means to cover all the needs that we are talking about. But however, I still feel that as local government, we have a huge responsibility because everything happened at local government. And when you check, we have a lot of programs which we are not integrating. And if we can integrate our programs such that they talk to each other, they make sure that they incorporate all our programs. For an example, we do public participation in terms of the IDP, we do public participation in terms of the annual report. But when you look into all those public participation, we never give time to incorporate other issues to make communities aware that there is this element called climate change and teach our communities about it. The other thing which I think we need to make sure that we strengthen, I don't know how you are engaging the sector department, the Department of Education, the higher education department. Let's make this part of the curriculum where from a childhood age, you learn that things are changing. Don't listen to your granny who tell you about the old story. You need to know the current story, that the things are changing. We used to have spring in September. It's no longer happening in September. Why? Let it be part of the curriculum where those sector departments are communicating. We are studying now. Let it be part of our curriculum, even at an older age, so that we start to culminate this climate change in our communities. Environmental issues, if you check how people are not learning to take their own environmental care of. And that's part of climate change, the looting around, just making sure that things are not in order in your environment, affect your own environment in terms of climate change. So I was just saying, let's try to include all those in our discussion paper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Those are very important insights, especially the question around climate literacy at higher education as well as basic education. That's a very important point to make. Prior to my stint here, I used to be in the unions. So when we established climate commissions, we used to ask the SATU teachers to be a part of our climate meetings. And then they'd ask us why we don't work in power plants. And they said, but you're supposed to be teaching our kids about climate change, because you're right. There are interesting stories that we are hearing when we get home and we talk about climate change. I often, when I go back home, just to ask and hear what people have to say, and there are interesting theories. But to get ahead is to boost the climate literacy, I think, at a foundational level. And I think that's an important part. The question relating to community capacity and building communities' capacity is very important. So we're having this conversation in Sandton. We shouldn't be here. We need to be in the communities. We need to be Achiwiri, Venda. We need to be in various other rural communities, because even though this is live stream, we know that we live in an era of a digital divide, which we need to take these things into consideration. The issue of, taking care of our communities, taking care of our environments. So the issue related to waste management yesterday in the consultation came up a lot from the faith-based communities, and this idea around how do we get a circular economy going. There's so many people that are unemployed, and here is a sector that, we can bring people into it and they can fend for themselves, which is a concept that we probably need to be developing a lot more than what we currently are. I saw there was a hand. I'm going to come to you. I'm just going to go to the gentleman in the green. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pambili. Yeah, I wish we could also be concise in the way we submit our inputs, so that if there are gaps, you can pronounce on those gaps so that we can we can come up with ways of closing those gaps. Because if we leave other issues hanging without pronouncing on them, sometimes it becomes futile to even engage, on these issues. I think one on my side, we really need to make pronouncement or say we don't know as per how does local government feature in NDCs? You see, that is critical. So that if we don't see local government featuring, we make that bold statement that in the whole NDC process, local government does not feature. Then what needs to be done if that is the case? Because that is the reason we are here. We're here to be consulted on NDC issues, but where do we feature in the NDC in terms of policy? Because I've already highlighted gaps, of which we need to make pronouncements so that correct advice could be given by those who are mandated to advise, Then the second one, I've heard even good presentation, Gadora, about the linkage between adaptation and NDC. I still need to be convinced. Where does adaptation and NDC link? If we can be crystal clear about that so that we don't go confused, because to me, NDC is more linked with the mitigation side in terms of sector emission targets. It's emission related, but I think, Dora, you're not the only person. I also heard the commissioner saying adaptation also feature in NDC, of which it might happen that it's me. I'm disoriented. I don't understand how these things are linking. I think to me, if we can pronounce on those two issues so that if there's a gap, before we go here, we acknowledge that there is a gap and what steps need to be taken, Then we also spoke about certain issues with regard to mitigation. Even there are a lot of gaps, like someone was talking about the early warning system, which is the best adaptation strategy or program. But we still need to discuss who has the mandate for early warning system. You're saying?
Source.
Good, okay. You see, that on its own, we really need to discuss that in terms of, because there is expectation that as local government, we should invest in early warning system. Like at Tegwini, I do have early warning system, but when it comes to transmitting information, there is a problem because there is a mandate there. You cannot just transmit information if you do not have a mandate to transmit information. And there seems to be a gap between us and South African Weather Services. There is a big gap between South African Weather Services and communities, meaning the issue of decentralizing South African, the early warning system seems to be an issue in terms of responsiveness of the early warning system in terms of communities. I think in the assessment that was done by a presidential commission in Itegwini in 2022 floods, it was highlighted that there was a delay in communication of information because South African Weather Services is there. The information from them to disaster risk centers, then to communities, it takes time. As well as the capacity of South African Weather Services now in terms of data, financial resources, human resources to have this huge mandate of responding to these issues. It's something that we need to discuss. I think on my side, that is it that I would like to submit.
Thank you very much for that. I just want to come in, Steve, I'm going to ask you to come in on the issue related to the linkage between adaptation and the NDCs, vis-a-vis NDCs just being purely about mitigation. And while we're at it, let's also tie the link between means of implementation as well. But I do want to, you're asking a question, but within the questions that you're asking, they're sounding like possible inputs into our recommendations report. So just to mention on the issue related to early warning systems, the PCC did commission a disaster management recommendation report, and the issue that you're highlighting around decentralizing early warning systems to the local level is one of the things that has been highlighted, because again, to make the systems more responsive is definitely what we need to be doing. I don't know, Steve, do you want to come in on the issue related to the link between adaptation as well as the NDCs?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the NDCs predominantly are mitigation documents. That's kind of how they're seen, and they arise out of the mitigation section of the Paris Agreement. But what countries have been doing, particularly on adaptation, is including adaptation as well, both in ambition and in terms of how we set targets. So, you want to have X level of resilience by a certain time. But then it's also an opportunity then to translate those adaptation commitments that we make into needs. So then in the means of implementation part, we can start to say, therefore we need this kind of support for capacity building, and we need this kind of support for technology and so on. So a lot of it is a country choice. How do we use this voluntary commitment to frame what's important to us? And so we have the opportunity, if you have ideas on how to make these linkages and the kinds of targets and framing that we should be doing for adaptation, we can give some advice on that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Before I take your hand, I just want to check, are there any comments online before we just continue talking? But Zimasa, I just want to take a question in this table, and then we'll come to you in terms of the questions online. Thank you, sir.
Okay, my name is Clement Mwepudi. I'm from the Grassroots for Climate Action Forum. The Grassroots Climate Action Forum is a forum for all NGO, NPOs, all the grassroots, meaning to say all the marginalized communities. We meet with all the organization to come with a common goal against climate change impacts. And also we are in this together because we are trying all the time, and we are advocating all the time from the specific departments like the DFFE. I'm surprised now there's no one who presented from the DFFE, because you can even hear the PCC said it's not them who do the work, it's the DFFE, but there's no senior from DFFE, from COP, because we are coming from COP29 to come on this very crucial meeting of local government. Our main thing is negligence of policies. Like now, the Climate Change Act, it's out, but it's not been promulgated because it's still delaying, but the climate change impacts are still continuing. And then the other things is that we have to change all our policies, like the Climate Change Act, Chapter 2, Section 7 said, all the government spheres must align, amend, change, and even improve their policies. The most important thing is about mitigation. To mitigate, for us, need funding. We need money to mitigate. The climate fund have been more or less than the impacts of the climate change. Now, like Trump have already taken the other funds which affects this climate change. Because when we take really serious that we have to mitigate, but when we mitigate under which context, because most of the people who are emitting are the people who have business. The people on the grassroots level, they do less emissions. But for us now, when we don't implement the Climate Change Act, we won't have accountability for the people who pollute and who emit. Because even my brother said, how are we going to monitor these gases? Because we need, I'm from the community in Tembisa, we need also to have those things in our townships, in each and every ward, because municipalities are wards. Each and every municipality got a ward. Each and every ward must be nearer information, because like now my brother is asking about the early warning system. Other people don't have data to access information. Other people, they don't know English. Even us inside here, other people, they don't know other terms here. Like my brother is asking, what is a difference between mitigation and adaptation? To mitigate is to phase out, to leave the thing that was causing climate change. Adaptation is to change way of things. We have to change way of eating. We have to change the way we travel. Sometimes we're going alone, one in cars. The emissions are getting high, and we have to promote the renewable energies. But for us as a country, as South Africa, we need to come with one common goal, because other people, they are in these departments which are crucial, like the DFFE, but they are not there to potential. They are there just to get a payroll. And after getting payroll, December time, where there is a lot of disasters, people are on holiday, they are enjoying. There's no one who compromised to save life. And the most other thing is that we need to call all the departments. The police was supposed to be here. The EMS emergency was supposed to be here. All the people who are in these institutions, mostly the three spheres of government, nationally, provincially, locally, because you can't go nationally without starting local, because nationally, you have to ask the people on the ground. We don't have to take that top to bottom approach. We have to take a bottom to up approach, because the people from the grassroots level, they don't have this information. We lucky enough, because me, I'm an activist, and I also thank to follow this ill treatment of climate change. But most of the important thing is the innovation. We have to also implement the innovation. We've got the artificial intelligence. We have to come also with our indigenous, because even our gogos, they were always looking at the sun and say it's going to rain, today is going to be, it's also indigenous. We don't have to always look on the scientific, because sometimes even the computer can make a mistake because it's controlled by a human being. But we have to come with the things that this thing that we are fighting, it is a pandemic. Climate change is not only for poor. You can even see in Hollywood, the billionaires, the houses are burned. You know, for you, at least you're still living in your nice space, because no disaster has happened to you. You can't see this. But what I like to emphasize is that the local government are the people, are the institution that all as grassroots level communities, we start at the local municipality. We pay our rates at the local municipalities. We get our services and then the service delivery is very poor, because like me, I'm staying in Tembisa. Most of the people who work in the municipality, they don't stay in Tembisa, they stay to other provinces. December, where there is a lot of disasters that can happen, they are not there, they are on holiday. When you ask, like Semi said, when you want the ambulance is not there. When you want police are not there. There is no quick and holistic response, because we need to have people who are committed to sacrifice for South Africa. We don't have to come here and take, we do the talking. We must do the work. all the time, because action speaks louder than words. Because even on the climate state action of South Africa, the commissioners are trying hard to put this information for us, but it's accessible by few people and accessible by the people who have resources. Like in the township, there is fiber, but there is load shedding. Our fiber can't work without electricity. We need funding and we need support from the national government, even the global communities, to install us also solars, because it's a renewable energy. But I can see now the system of our government is promoting the things that are more and doing a lot of global warming, like promoting this fossil fuel. They don't talk about the renewable energies initiative. Now, like nuclear. Nuclear is a very dangerous and a very radiated energy. But for us, due to this load shedding, we will at the end allow the things that are going to do more disaster. Because even now the president have raised to us that there is a climate change response fund, but no one now knows how to access that fund. There is a lost and damaged fund, which are concentrating on this thing of mitigation, is to mitigate and to adapt. But if we don't have finance, we need finance. We don't need millions, we need trillions to mitigate and adapt. And also we need monitoring and evaluation and also accountability, because now the other departments are not there. The other department can't account for the other department. That's why we need to make one simple policies for all the government institutions, so that even when you go to health, they will help you about climate change. When you go to Home Affairs, they will help you about climate change. But for now, our approach is just as long my department is not dealing with climate change. But climate change is a pandemic for all of us, and especially the vulnerable, the poor people in the township, in the rural areas. They don't have access to what we, like me, I'm from Tembisa, at least I can see. But other things are more happening, like even the Kalspruit River. I like Shafiq Adams. He's talking about water resources. We've got our river Kalspruit. The chemical company, every day it opens the chemical to walk through the river. But in the government, there's no one who's checking water quality, air quality. There's a Kelvin power station. Mostly when you can go to Tembisa Hospital, you will find most of the people are intellectual challenged. You know, we've got other diseases that we, even the scientists, they don't know what kind of disease is this. Because me as Clement from G4CA, I'm advocating also for disability rights. I'm here also presenting, because I can hear, since you present here, no one spoken about disabled people. What about when there is a flood and you are on the wheelchair? Because each and everyone here can be disabled. You can drive your car now and get accident. They cut your leg off. You are working nice, you get nice pay. But when the disaster like in Hollywood comes, the fire comes, what are you going to do? What are the responses are you going to do? Are there enough people? Are there enough manpower and capacity to respond to the disasters and emergencies? Like last week, we went to Gqeberha, because as G4CA, we try to cover all the provinces, so that we know the challenges, because even Tembisa challenges are not the same as Soweto challenges. But now we have to take action, because action speaks louder than words. Because mostly we can see the people who are dealing with this, they prefer profit than people's life. We don't have to promote profits that will at the end put the whole earth, even not South Africa, the whole earth to catastrophic effects. And the other last thing that I want to make, the PCC must be impartial, must be independent, because in the Climate Change Act, the people who pollute, because there's a carbon capture inventory, there's a emission inventory, there's everything, the tools are in the Climate Change Act.
Sure.
But due to lack of implementation, no one now can implement anything because everyone now is looking who's doing this, and there are international partners who have poured millions of dollars in South Africa for the project, but the project it seems as if they are from Mpumalanga fela. It's like Mpumalanga fela,
Sure.
but we need also to look all the wards, all the
Sure.
municipalities.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Clement. Those are really important inputs, and I feel like I cut you there. That's why that mitigation email address is important. Any further inputs, please put them there. And I just want to assure you about the PCC, right? Because I'm hearing this point a lot about the fact that we need to remain impartial. Our primary mandate is that we are an independent advisory body. So we are not influenced by, we simply take what the science is telling us, we feed it to stakeholders, we consolidate a consensus view, and we advise the president. That is the modus operandi of the people. And wait, I just want to, I want to address that quickly, because, you know, we're not in any way prescribing what we think is the best, but we are informing stakeholders of what process or what the science is saying, basically. And we are coming back to you to also feed in your input so that we can have a balanced approach moving forward. Time is also not on our side, and I do want to give the online audience a chance to say something. So if you're going to say something, it has to be 10 seconds long. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, and we need also the booklets for awareness.
Absolutely.
And we need also to translate because this English for us, our community grassroots level is taking a lot to understand.
No,
We need all the languages because we are in South Africa.
And that's why, as the PCC, we've already thought of phase 2 of this process around how we want to take recommendations from the NDC process, summarize them in our in our languages, so that we can distribute, and not just in a written format. We do want to make short videos that are easily distributable so that we can get the messages as easily understandably as possible so that more people can interact with this knowledge. So I take that into consideration 100%. Simas, I'm going to go to you so that we can go to the online participant. If you could just indicate to me how many there are.
We have 4 questions/comments.
Okay, cool.
All right. So starting with Getina Chikwanda. As she says, research support by academia is necessary to focus on customizing and validating technologies, financial modeling, and overall social and economic impact to the country as a whole. She adds that factoring in funding models available to the various stakeholders, especially municipalities, whose role is to ensure service delivery, is critically important. Another key comment from Getina is that more inclusive discussions with economists modeling the implications of each proposed intervention, that is quite key, including the vetting of the overall impact of the proposed technology. She asks for holistic solutions that do not lead to job losses, unaffordable services, and economic downturn. Academia must come up with customized solutions on existing infrastructure to reduce the environmental impact and the emission contribution. Then lastly, from Getina Chikwanda, we must use technologies that do not come as a package ready to implement. So what's important here is the local content which is required. That is quite key for her. We move to Commissioner Baduza. I think she's referring to Commissioner Bukunzi, when she was talking about the need for better cooperative governance. She says that there's Climate Act talk about municipal and provincial forums for climate change. These means of implementation are key. It will be a platform for capacity building and the likes. That's what these forums will focus on. Then lastly, from Commissioner Nordey, I think this is in response to earlier discussions, the climate system can't go backwards. So net zero does not make it go backwards. It is what it was before. The emissions that we all have already emitted already lock us in to the climate changes we are currently experiencing. Reducing emissions is about trying to prevent it from getting worse and worse. That is all from my side, Ms. Facilitator.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments. I think it also aligns with the conversations that we've been having here in the room today. So I'm pleased with the fact that people are quite engaged when it comes to these conversations. And just to touch on the last comment that came up, and I think it ties very well with the presentation that you made, Dora, around the fact that where we currently find ourselves, there are challenges where we currently are. The economy as it is, we're in an era of deindustrialization. We're not producing the amount of jobs that we need for people to be adequately employed. There's high levels of poverty and unsustainable levels of inequality. So where we are, in essence, is an unjust starting place that we are, and it's an inadequate place that we are starting from. So it is in our best interest to move to something that can get us towards addressing the socioeconomic challenges that we currently face. So when we were having a brainstorming session internally, we were saying that if within the just transition that we're locating as central to the NDC, we are not addressing current challenges and socioeconomic challenges, then this is a wasted exercise and there's no need for us to be in this room together. So that helps us to increase our ambition in what we are trying to achieve with this process of advising government on what the NDC for South Africa ought to be. And that the NDC is also an important tool to help us reimagine and reconfigure our economy in such a way that it takes us towards a path of industrialization and we're able to create jobs. But this doesn't happen automatically. And it doesn't happen without effort from yourselves. There are things that you need to put into place, and hence there's a need for a means of implementation section for the NDCs so that you plan how you do the things that you need to do in order to get to that desired state that you wish for, that also takes you down the trajectory of net zero towards 2050. Now, I'm left with a very impossible task of trying to summarize what's been said in today's session. But I think what we've been talking about is how important it is to strengthen the capacity of local government. I think that's come up quite a bit in today's conversation, because local government is, because I mean, I like being in policy. I get to write about whatever. No one's going to hold me to anything. Local government, you have a serious task on your hands, because you must be able to practically implement those at a local level. And that's where you are interacting with our communities and you're at the cold phase of implementation. So strengthening of your capacity is very important. And I think that's one of the things that should definitely be reflected in this report. I think the question around the role of DFFE in the process that we are undertaking here today, or in this consultation that we are having with stakeholders has come up quite a bit. And Steve did mention in his overview that DFFE is running its own process. The PCC's process is that of capacitating stakeholders so that when the DFFE process comes around, you have the necessary knowledge to interact with them when they do their public consultation, but also to advise the president on what we think the NDC for South Africa should be. But there's also another thing that I'm hearing in the room around, because the NDC, we're talking about a reorganizing of your economy as you know it. It can't just be a DFFE function, all right? Because it's not just about issues related to the environment. We're broadening the scope quite a bit here. We're touching on issues of financing. If you paid attention to Steve's slides that he was showing when he did the overview, when he was talking about how climate finance is flowing, a large amount of the climate finance that we're receiving is coming from the private sector. So there are questions around how we manage fiscal policy in such a way that climate finance allocations do form part of fiscal policy planning at a national level, so that we can address issues related to the role of Treasury in these conversations, as well as the role of DTIC, the role of COGTA. Bali Baduza, Commissioner Baduza, you mentioned the issue of COGTA being playing a role in these processes. There's been a lot of conversation around the need for funding models. And I know for you to access concessional loans, the biggest thing that municipalities have to grapple with is, healthy balance sheets. No one is going to give you even a highly concessional loan or a grant if you don't have a very healthy and a good story to tell in terms of your balance sheet. So those are issues for municipalities also to take into consideration. I hear the point around accessibility of this information. Hence, I talked about phase 2 of the NDC process and how we want to increase accessibility leading up to COP30 in Brazil. And I also take the comment related to those who have disabilities, that we really need to take better measures to make sure that they are included in the conversation, because the issues related to vulnerabilities, there are different levels of vulnerability. And in our conversations, it's not just if we don't take into consideration those that are most vulnerable amongst us. Innovation and leveraging innovation, I think, has also come up in today's conversation. For me, that sounds like finance and innovation is key for the means of implementation, especially when we're talking about issues related to, especially when it talks about issues related, especially when it talks about issues related to the just transition. There was also an issue related to early warning systems around the need for them to be decentralized so that, it's easier to transmit information to those that are in your localities that you are responding to, so that they can have this information. But we know what the digital divide looks like, especially when you get into the more rural areas of our country. So those also need to be addressed to a certain level. We've addressed the issues related to adaptation as well as vis-a-vis mitigation. There are still challenges when it comes to finance flows, predominantly financing going in the direction of mitigation vis-a-vis adaptation. And we realize that as a serious issue that needs to be prioritized and understood much better. I think to a large extent, and I don't want to say that this was the entire conversation that we've had here today, because we've had quite a bit of engagement and discussion in today's session. But what we will do from the side of the Presidential Climate Commission is we will have a summary of each stakeholder session that we have. So there will be a summary for local government. There will be a summary for all the various stakeholders. And you can access the videos from today's discussion if you do want to share them amongst your colleagues, so that they can also have a flair for what we were discussing in today's session. So that's as much of a summary as I could put together in the short amount of time that I've had here today. So in terms of closure, just to say thank you very much. for being a part of today's session, coming all the way here to participate in this very important conversation. Like I said, we had the capacity building session in December. Now we've heard your views from local government and the various stakeholders. We're going to be having a few more roundtable discussions. We'll also be going to a colloquium. And we also want to, at the end of this process, have a recommendations report that we want the commissioners to approve so that we can send it to the president as a collective response on what we believe South Africa's NDC should be. The team also have a tough challenge on their hands because we've taken a decision that we want this policy recommendation to be 10 pages long. Because we don't want to beat about the bush. This is what the NDC should be. This is our motivation, and it should be within 10 pages. And yeah, so that again, for an accessibility point of view, that makes things better for those who interact with the policy recommendation. So with that said, thank you very much. Thank you for participating very vibrantly. Lunch is served. It is when you exit here on your right, lunch will be served. And thank you very much for those that gave their inputs and participated in the session. We'll see you all at the colloquium.